All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:11. We had Shauna here for our minute taker, so great, hooray. We're all happy. Is there any public comment at this time? If you'll just state your name, because I know there's new faces up here that don't know who you are.
So I'm Terry Fitzgerald, and I was expecting to have a student, Carly Counter, here that I was going to be speaking with her in regards to the Mount Abraham Union High School Community Council. And I know that this is going to come before you next week, but she was bringing in some papers to invite you because we're starting to do some more organization this year. And there's a meeting on Thursday right after school. And we'd like to invite someone from the board to take part, or many of you to take part in that. And if you don't know about Community Council, it was started many years ago, and it's kind of gone through some different phases over the years, but it's where students and teachers and community members and board members and administration can all talk about issues at the high school. And it's a really important function and gives an avenue for students to have voice in issues that concern them in the school and to bring those issues to each other and have comments from the adults and to be able to vote on where they'd like things to go. So I'd just like to invite you to Thursday's meeting and to hear more about it. And if Carly shows up, she'll have some information. And then I believe, Donnie, is it coming in next month's agenda or something?
Right. Carly, or actually Isabella, contact Isabella? Courier. Yeah, contacted me about student reps on the Mount Abraham the Unified Board, and we have not gone through that, so I'm going to build time in the agenda next month to actually maybe have a discussion, so it would kind of be like a mini community engagement with a specific stakeholder group, students. So that will be a next month's agenda, and I would hope that she would come and, because she's one of the representatives. Do you know what time the meeting starts? It's at
3 o'clock on Thursday.
3 o'clock.
In the library.
This Thursday?
This Thursday. And so they're going to try to get kind of organized for the year and hoping to look at what their schedule will be and things like that. But we did want to issue the invitation tonight. And I'm sorry I'm not staying very long to volleyball game, but I did want to issue the invitation before I left.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have one quick thing. I need to add a consent agenda item.
More public comment.
Yes, and I'll hop right back to the public comment, but we need to add item F to approve of leave of absence for Tori Riley as presented. And then under board management, item M, to just a brief review of the letter you asked about last meeting, about some sort of letter from the board chair to the community members about public comment. I'm not asking you to wordsmith, I just want you to look at it, and if there's something glaringly missing, tell me, otherwise I'm just going to go ahead with it. Okay? All right, and now the other public comment.
That's me.
Oh, that's you. Oh, that's you.
I just wanted to take this opportunity. For those that don't know, the Vermont legislature deemed January School Board Recognition Month. And I think you all got your coupons for darn tough socks because you do a darn tough job. I love that. But in addition to that, and you probably also saw that you all have free admission to all really varsity basketball games. I don't know if they charge admission for wrestling at the high school as well, but basically any event that happens at the high school, you have free admission for yourselves and families, so take advantage of that. Just to be clear, it doesn't count VPA playoff games. You'll have to pay for those because that's a VPA thing, but we have no control over that. But I also wanted to present each school board member with a certificate of appreciation on behalf of the Vermont School Boards Association and the Mount Abraham Unified School District. So I have a certificate for everyone here that I'll distribute throughout the night. So thank you all for your work. It's tireless work, often underappreciated, if not unappreciated, but critical to making our school system the best it can be. So thank you.
All right. Any more public comment? Sure.
Jamie Schulte, Moncton. Not sure kind of where we are several months on from the unification and the new board, and with the topic of the high school, I kind of followed all of the last few attempts to raise funds to, do something with the high school. And I guess the question that on my mind is just sort of, where does the board see that as the next step? There's been some community activity and so forth around it, but it doesn't feel like anything's moving forward at the moment. So I don't know if that's something that's possible to comment on in the course of this, or maybe it's already part of the presentation.
You may hear more about it when we move down and have an update from the Community Engagement Committee, because they are setting forth on some work with a facilitator that may encompass that particular topic along with a few other ones. So you may hear something about it as we progress through the agenda.
Yeah, it's fair to say that some portion of the community is probably pretty interested in where that's going next.
Agreed. All right, thank you. All right, down to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda items A through F? Jen?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, is there a second? Erin? All right, all in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, onward. Next, down to the update from the financial and food service reports included in your packet. Is there any burning questions you have?
So Howard, there's a rough estimate of $380,000 for the carryover for the next budget cycle,
For the end of this fiscal year.
as opposed to 1.5
Well,
for this,
outside of the health insurance,
which is still
we
a,
still have fully encumbered, and we don't know what's gonna happen with that. We still have 6 months of regular claims that need to go through, and we still need data pad to pick up where they've left off. And if anybody can figure that out, I'd be glad to talk. It's just a troubling thing that continues, will probably continue through the end of this fiscal year.
Probably fair to characterize it as a very rough estimate of 380,000 for the end of the year.
right, but relatively speaking, quite a bit lower than
Exactly.
we've seen historically. I have a dumb question if it's so, Howard, on the food service. I keep getting the parentheses mixed up.
Oh, you want to know whether it's income or loss? Is that what you want to know?
Yeah, because the line above the total at the bottom puts a loss in parentheses.
Yeah, the credits are shown as bracketed, so you actually are showing a loss here of 58,984 at this point.
So we're running in the red on food
We
service.
are. And a lot of that relates to healthcare.
Oh, to healthcare.
A lot of people have signed up for healthcare and created pretty good amount of money going in that direction.
All right. Some of that has been anticipated in the next budget cycle. That's it for me.
Okay, anyone else have any questions?
Kevin had some. Kevin, did you get my responses?
Yes, I did, thank you.
Okay, you okay with that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Right. Everyone remembers that when you get the financials and the pay orders, if you have questions, you can, the way we work this out is they can go to Howard. Granted, if you have 3 pages worth of questions, send them to me and we'll work through them slowly, but, when we got questions, Howard or Cheryl was on the original, Cheryl can help. Okay. All right, we'll keep moving along then. Down, update, the final budget presentation. If you want, you can swing seats. If not, you can take a seat out there and to see the presentation, whichever is easier or more comfortable.
Are you handing out the presentation? Are you handing out copies of the presentation or not?
Yep.
I'm just deciding if I had to bring my device or not.
Here, I can do that.
Where am I going to be least in the way? Probably over
Wherever
here.
you want to stand.
I'll take that also.
So hot off the presses, those of you that were looking at this yesterday when I shared it with you, it looks different than it did yesterday. Some changes came through today that we caught, so I wanted to make sure you had the very most updated version that you could have prior to adopting a budget. So this reflects that. And that shows up when we get to the financials toward the end of the presentation. And some of this is sort of a repeat of the last presentation that you saw in December. But I think it's good to reflect back on some of that as we set the stage for the financials. So we talked about this squeeze that I think you as a board feel. Certainly we as administrators feel this squeeze where, from certain constituents we hear requests and needs for more resources, feeling like what we have for resources currently is insufficient. And yet from other constituents we hear spending on education is unaffordable and it's unsustainable and we have to do something about that. We hear that from the state level, we hear that locally. So that's an aspect of the squeeze that is very real as we try to figure out how to adjust our actions and behaviors moving forward. We also have this idea where some feel like our pace of change is too quick and others feel like we're not changing quickly enough relative to the demographic shifts and what's going on statewide and nationally. So I just think it's important to acknowledge that, and it's real, and we feel that squeeze all the time, and that's that balancing act that we walk. I won't say every year, but certainly every year in recent memory, and every year in the foreseeable future. This is the walk that we're going to have to walk. And so what do we do with that? Where do we go from here? For me, I think we need to really think about how do we utilize our systems. So to me, as we're trying to be more efficient, more effective, having sound systems, making changes to build those systems is critical. And we utilize those systems in a focused way and focus on those priorities. That means that we have priorities. And so I've put up here the priorities that have been established for us this year, sort of in general terms, which is really about being clear about what do we want our students to know and be able to do. Really important that that's clear, it's articulated vertically and horizontally throughout our organization, so that school to school, we have that clarity, and that grade to grade, we have that clarity. And we also need to make sure that we're focusing on supporting the social and emotional needs of our students. These are the two priority areas that have been identified within our strategic plan that I'll get a little bit more in depth in the next slides. And we need to focus on those things. We need to build those systems. We need to have this focus so that we can help ensure success for all students, which is a priority that was set by our community, and I think a priority that every single person in our organization holds true. And meanwhile, we have to do that while finding these efficiencies and creating some cost savings because of those other pressures that we know we're hearing from folks about, the challenges of the affordability of living in Vermont, part of which is the education system. And so to that effect, on December 5th, the sort of the direction that I received from the board was build a budget that doesn't have staffing reductions in recognition of the effort that we went through to get to this year. Lots of staffing reductions, lots of staffing changes that we're still working through and trying to make work the best that they can. And to use the same fund balance amount as FY19. And that kind of comes back to Steve's point about, so we're looking at a whole lot less money as a fund balance from this year than we had in prior years. And so that difference in fund balance carry forward becomes a loss of revenue as we build FY21. And that is very true. And that loss of revenue will be on top of any other challenges we face with the budget. If we lose equalized pupil again, which we anticipate we will, if we have increased expenses, which is a guarantee because that always happens unless you're making significant change, those will be on top of this decrease in revenue that we anticipate. Another decrease in revenue anticipated is in special education. They're changing special education funding formulas to a block grant away from a reimbursement model that will take effect in FY21. And we'll have a lot more flexibility in how those special education funds are used, but I suspect it will be considerably less money we have to use in a flexible way. So that too will be a loss of revenue on top of any reduction in fund balance carry forward. So I'm very cautious about the combination of events as we look toward building FY21. So as we sit in these seats this time next year, not wanting to dig ourselves a really big hole. And we can talk about that in a little bit more as well. So these are the community priorities that were established. I know there are 2 3s up there. That's intentional because there was a tie for third place in terms of the priorities. I got some feedback from folks on that when I shared this with everyone. That's not a typo. But really it's about allocating resources in ways that we ensure success for all students. We saw that on one of those first slides. Absolutely, there's consistency, that's a priority, and that's not just unique for the community, it's unique for our school system as well. And then also looking to create cost savings through collaboration and efficiencies as a newly unified district. Which I would say we were able to achieve to a great extent this year, and we're going to have to continue to look for those efficiencies for years to come. Also, this need to invest in teachers so that students have high-quality learning experiences. That absolutely is a piece of equity. The quality of instruction that students receive in their schools is of the utmost importance in ensuring success, and therefore having consistent quality across our schools is important for equity for students. Absolutely. And then making strong investments in our schools. I've interpreted this to mean in the physical plant of our schools. So that the facilities represent the important work that's happening there, which I think connects back to your comment earlier. And that's certainly not something that's lost on this board. And it's very much related to the community engagement that Don referenced. So these were the priorities that were identified from those 506 surveys that were gathered this fall, October maybe. In addition to the community priorities, within the strategic plan that is nearing completion and is complete enough that we needed to get some sense of direction for next year to inform the budget building process. So we collected some input from staff to get an idea of what does the staff see as a priority within the strategic plan. Knowing the strategic plan is rather large, there's a lot of work there, we need to really be clear about what's priority for year number 1. And so these are the priorities that have been established for year number 1 by the staff. And under social, emotional, and physical development, that all MAUSD students develop their social, emotional, and physical well-being. High priority, specifically this first objective, making sure that they're able to effectively apply the knowledge, skills, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, etc. You heard in the tour about PBIS. That's really at the heart of the instruction and the supports from a systems perspective that are being built across schools. Each school is in a different place in their implementation of this, but the focus is to get all schools to a further state of implementation of PBIS so that we have greater consistency across our schools and the support structures to support students in their social, emotional, and physical well-being. So priority there. The other priority I'm happy to see was in expertise in learning. Kind of makes sense that that's a priority area for us. And this is really where it's getting down to that aligned K-12 proficiency-based curriculum. That clarity on what do we want our students to know and be able to do that's both vertically and horizontally articulated. It's a ton of work. Even to think that both of these priorities will be achieved next year is probably a stretch. The idea is let's get these really well established and off the ground and launched. Get the heavy lifting of getting them going next year so that we can make way for the following year to continue working on other priorities within the strategic plan. And I guess if I bring this back to the big picture, what was really important from the board's perspective, as I understood it, which makes perfect sense to me, was I think the board was interested in seeing, now that we've gathered this input from the staff, now that we've gathered this input from the community, how are those reflected in this budget that we're building for FY20. So this sort of sets the stage for what those priorities are. And so now we need to think about what are the resources needed to support these priorities. And you can see here in this expertise and learning objective, the resources are money for teachers to work in the summer, the professional development time that is focused, and deepening those understandings of proficiencies. So we've already had conversations as an administrative team about how do we, without necessarily adding money to the bottom line, because as you'll see soon enough, that's not realistic. So working within the numbers that we have, how do we really harness the monies that we do have and the resources we do have in a really focused way that target these priorities. And that is exactly the work that we're going to be doing. So it used to be each school sort of had their own professional development money, they had their own summer stipend money. We now really need to, as a unified district with these priorities, harness that money as a pool and really target that money collectively toward these priorities. So the opportunities for teachers to utilize funds outside of our priority areas is going to have to be scaled back some. That's the whole purpose of having priorities and having these focus areas, which will be a shift, and that will be hard for some, because it may not mean being able to do what we've always done, but it's very intentional in why we're doing it. And so resources on the social and emotional priority, really professional development, continued professional development on the universal, targeted, and intensive supports. So that's the PBIAS you heard Ms. Tatlock talking a little bit about. Universal, I don't think she used the term universal, but she talked about targeted at least, perhaps intensive. So we have, again, schools in different stages. We have a number of schools going next month, just a few weeks, end of March, to different levels of training. I think Moncton's going to intensive. We have other schools going to targeted and other schools going to intensive. So kind of moving all schools forward from wherever they are toward building this. And that will continue into next year as well. And part of what's happening right now is sort of an assessment of, well, where is each school? And looking across multiple schools, which we have more people now in positions to look across multiple schools in focus areas, like what's going on with social, emotional, and physical development. So to have that kind of side-by-side comparison of where each school is and thinking about how as an organization do we move everyone toward a common end, our capacity to do that is much greater than it's ever been. As we think about coaches, interventionists, coordinators, now in eyes across multiple schools. It's more than just a few central office administrators that have that perspective, which is really, really beneficial. And again, focusing professional development, in particular on trauma, which it connects to, I know there are some universal things we can do around trauma, there are some targeted things, but perhaps in particular around the intensive supports around trauma. And so where do we see in the budget? Well, we see in the budget, but also in our practices, things that tie into those priorities, both in the distribution of class teachers. We talked about expertise. We talked about professional development, wanting to build that capacity in our teachers and have that be consistent across schools. So we have common practices. That's where the role of coaches really is beneficial. Coaches are working with teachers across all of our schools. Coaches meet and talk about with their coordinators about what's going on with the practices they're seeing. We'll continue to get better at identifying practices we want to see and supports to put in place to have those practices happening in our schools. So that's part of how we utilize our resources and we embed practices that get us to where we need to be. Thinking about our distribution of support staff, coaches, interventionists, the PD we talked about, money for supplies, access to safe and healthy facilities. That is now our responsibility to look across schools. Used to be, in particular as a school board, it used to be, as a school board, your focus is on the one school you're a school board member of, unless you happen to sit on multiple boards. But primarily it was your focus is on your school, not necessarily paying a whole lot of attention to what's going on in other schools. Now it's really our responsibility to look across schools and think about equity. It's a different kind of responsibility, and it's a shift in thought, but is important to do so that we can ensure that there's equity and access to those things. And so as I think about where do we see the community priorities reflected for community priority number 2, so those efficiencies, we've been looking at food service as a way to do that. Facilities purchasing is something that's happening. A specific example there, across all of our elementary schools now, the tools custodians have access to, the cleaning materials they have access to, the training that they have is universal, so that custodians, if they need to fill in other schools, they're using the same vacuum, the same cleaning materials. They're not having to teach themselves or have someone teach them how to use the things that are unique to that school because they're consistent across schools. So we're growing in our efficiencies in that regard. in addition to purchasing. So that training, those supplies, because they're the same, we're buying in bulk now, more so than we've been in the past from a particular company. We get better rates because of that. So we're working on achieving efficiencies from that perspective. Flexibility with staffing, and this is specifically facility staffing. We kind of talked about that. But also this flexibility allows us to put together, say, a painting team in the summer rather than hiring contractors to do some of our painting. So we're going to continue to exercise some of that flexibility. Perhaps a mowing crew, and we don't have to subcontract for mowing as much as we have. So we're looking for things like that. We save some money in the audit, and actually a lot of money in Board of Education, interestingly enough. There's a third as many board members as there used to be. That has an impact. So for our tie in number 3, investing in teachers. So we're in budget negotiations right now. I have no reason to believe we won't be seeing increases in teacher salaries. So that's an investment in teachers, I would say. Our benefits package is competitive. I know that's an interest from the board's perspective in negotiations, is we want to create a competitive compensation package so that this is a desirable place for people to come and work. And I think we'll be able to achieve that. That focus of that money, focus of the professional development, and focus on that training, that's key. To me, that's the whole purpose of a strategic plan, is to be able to focus resources. Historically, resources have been less focused. We really need to tie that much more closely now to our focus areas that have been identified in a really collaborative way. Again, that's a change. It will mean some people don't get to do things they've historically done, but it's with intention and has intended outcomes. The other number 3, investing in our schools. So we really need to continue investing and focusing training for staff, as we've talked about. But in addition, we have considerable money for your sort of typical repairs and maintenance. We also have debt service, where we're paying on really just 2 schools now. And in addition to that, we still have in this budget the $1 million for construction services. That is still primarily earmarked for Mount Abraham because it's the school with the greatest need. But as our focus this year is really on safety, there are some schools that haven't sort of historically had enough money budgeted to be able to make some of the safety upgrades that they need to. So we have the flexibility now to dip into this $1 million a bit to make those safety upgrades. So right now we're focusing on PA systems. We have some schools, including Mount Abe, that either don't have PA systems or have PA systems that are basically worthless. So to me, that's a significant safety concern. Administrators or designees need to be able to get onto a PA system from wherever they are and announce an emergency. It has to happen. We have to make sure our front doors lock and get locked. Basic security measure. And so we have this money that's flexible so we can identify some of those priorities and really get some work done there. And we have a full-time groundskeeper, specifically right now at the high school, but again this summer, potential for that person to help with mowing and groundskeeping elsewhere. Again, trying to make sure that, that our facilities look like the important work that's happening there outside in. We want them to appear welcoming, well-kept, clean, etc. And it takes people to do that. So we're going to maintain the full-time groundskeeper that we currently have in this budget going forward as well. And so thinking about the staff priorities, so again, these practices on focus. You see that idea of focus a number of times throughout because it's critical and it's the whole point of our 3-year process of creating a strategic plan to give us areas to focus on so that we can achieve outcomes that we want to achieve. And so building a plan for the professional development around those focused areas and then utilizing our internal and external resources to achieve those focus areas, specifically around proficiencies. Mount Abe's done a ton of work with proficiencies over the past 3 or 4 or more years, maybe more. And so it's really taking root, and it has been a pretty grassroots effort at Mount Abe, and it's actually it's thrived despite the fact that there's been so many principals at Mount Abe over the last several years. Like, this is something that has continued to grow and people have really adhered to, which is great. So there's a lot of expertise in district already. And in fact, in building this year's budget, we increased time for proficiency coaches, proficiency-based learning coaches, to be able to support elementary schools as we work this plan forward. So our capacity to extend our understanding of proficiency-based learning is pretty strong, and we'll be able to put that into play, through this spring as we build plans for next year, and then for sure next year. So social, emotional, and physical development. So we're really looking at, in terms of the budget and practices, again, thinking about a professional development plan that focuses on that. Thinking about PBIS and the different tiers, supporting that work, thinking about trauma, and ways that we can get more trauma-informed practices in place. So it's really just about focusing the current money we have on those priorities. That's a lot of information so far. There's a lot more to come, but I want to pause for a minute and just answer any questions that come to mind. And I think we didn't talk about this so much beforehand, but Don and I had a chance to connect briefly. Typically at this point in an agenda, there isn't opportunity for sort of a community dialogue back and forth, but in the light of the fact that last week's community opportunity had to get canceled because of the weather, we were thinking that this could be an opportunity for back and forth. So if the board's okay with it, I would encourage anyone to ask questions and allow this to be a conversation.
Could you talk a little bit about the summer curriculum stipend money? What it's been used for, what it should be used for, and where we're going with that?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. I might kick it to Katrina to elaborate. She has sort of overseen that recently at the district level. But summer curriculum stipend might be, so a high school example comes to mind. If a teacher is teaching a new section of something they haven't taught before, there's quite a lot of work in sort of building the syllabus and really understanding the materials and the scope and sequence and kind of building that work out. So a summer curriculum stipend might be for that teacher to have a couple of days in the summer to be paid. It's $200 a day is the rate, so it's a set rate for everyone. That they can come in and do that work in preparation for the next year. So oftentimes it's curricular changes that are, being prepared for in the following year, and it pays teachers, that fee to do that work over the summertime, usually when it can't be achieved during the school year.
Is there ever any touch time for tutoring or interventing or anything like that?
That's not built in, so that would be something different. So oftentimes that comes through special education and extended school year services, which is sort of a different pay, different sort of scope of work altogether. But for students that have that need, that does happen. We do have our expanded learning program, which provides lots of opportunities for students to, not so much tutoring, but to continue their learning.
That was a great program.
It's an outstanding program, yes. And it's growing and getting better every year, which is exciting. Need any more than that? I think Katrina and Susan would happily chime in and give you more.
No, it's fine, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, Allison?
So how does PBIS mesh with MTSS? Are you moving from PBIS to MTSS? You're keeping both of them?
They dovetail lovely. So PBIS is sort of, it's the social emotional sort of aspect of a multi-tiered system of support. So you heard reference to a universal level of support. So that's something that all students benefit from. Then there's a targeted level of support that students that are receiving targeted get the universal and targeted, and then intensive. And those students would receive universal support, targeted support, and intensive support, which is exactly the model of a multi-tiered system of support. That so on the academic side, our core instruction happening in the classroom, everyone benefits from that. Some students receive a little extra help through Tier 2, that targeted intervention, and some students receive universal, targeted, and intensive. That might be time with one of our interventionists. So they mirror one another.
There's a systems piece to it as well, with a multi-tiered system of support. It's, there's infrastructure and leadership and training pieces that are beyond the scope of just PBIS or the academic side, an academic system of support. So it's much more comprehensive.
So does that mean each school can decide to do PBIS or not PBIS? Because on the budget side, we're always talking about MTSS, and now we're hearing about PBIS. Bristol used to do PBIS, I don't know if we still do, but I'm just, just seems to be a little bit of a disconnect at the moment.
Every school is engaged in PBIS on some level, and there's also been fits and starts. So really, Lincoln was probably our first school, maybe 12 years ago, really started embracing the tenets of PBIS. And now it is literally spoken to in the strategic plan for the district. So now it puts a little bit more support for everybody to get stronger, more on the same page. Everybody is in a different place right now to some degree, so now is the opportunity for us to build those supports and move forward. We're very excited that 3 of our schools are getting the Tier 3 intensive training. That means they've gone through Universal, they've gone through Targeted, now they're ready to go to Universal. That's Moncton, Robinson, and Bristol. So that's great that we've got 3 schools that are way in the front like that, because then the other schools can learn from them as they move forward through the tiers as well. And you saw, this was a great example, and Chris asked me about it in the hallway too, great example of what we just saw with Carolyn and the kids, and talking about the pause. Every school's got a little something like that going on, including the high school, which is great.
And that's the advantage of a strategic plan. Historically, I would say it's true that schools could choose PBIS or no PBIS, and it was mostly sort of at the discretion of the building principal. Do we do this or do we not do that? And then some coaxing probably from central office folks like, oh, you think you really want to do this? This is great. We're trying to build a system, but really dependent upon a building principal's decision if that was a priority for their school or not. Being a focus area in the strategic plan, it's understood. We're all doing this. This is no longer an option. This has been identified as something we're doing as a school district. All of our schools are going to do that, and we're going to take everyone from where they are and move them forward.
It's also partially why we worked so hard for this current year to build a social emotional learning team. So we actually have people who are well trained in PBIS or the components of it who can help the building principals and their school-based teams move things forward also. So that leadership is really important. The capacity of that is really important. So it's not all falling on one principal or one team that is busy with so many other initiatives. You can lean on each other a little bit more now that we're a district and have more capacity.
And again, those people that have eyes across schools now being greater in number is a real benefit to helping schools, because they're seeing what's working or not working in other schools, and they can use that learning and apply it to help other schools move forward. And we're just barely scratching the surface of the potential for that kind of work across schools and understanding more about what's happening across our schools.
So I know that with the strategic plan and all of the ambition, there was a strong focus on professional development to move those initiatives forward. Do you feel like are we using the same amount of professional development money and hoping to allocate it in a different way from last year's budget? Do you feel like we have put in enough resources to scratch the surface?
I've asked that very question, and I think the answer is yes. I think we have sufficient funds. I do think we're pretty well resourced in the area of professional development. It hasn't historically been really focused. Now this new sort of focus on a couple of specific areas for professional development across our system, I think we're going to see a lot more return on that investment. And we may find differently as we try to apply the resources we have with a more focused area, that it isn't sufficient. But our belief right now is, yes, as we think about that pool of money that has historically lived in different pockets in different places, if we think about bringing that all together, we feel like that's a pretty significant amount of money. I forget what the total dollar is, but it's in the tens of thousands of dollars for sure, that we can apply on these focus areas. And the idea of growing capacity of some leadership within district to then so it isn't, if the goal is let's send every teacher away to some conference somewhere on one of these focus areas, it's not even close to enough. And the reality is the impact of that is pretty minimal. If we really think about doing this in a strategic way where we might send a core group of people to get trained really deeply to come back, and then our early release days and our in-service days are focused on that, and we have leadership in-house delivering that professional development, we're well-resourced to be able to do that. And that is proven to be more effective. As I think about coaches, coordinators, administrators sort of delivering the professional development in these areas to our system, they're then within the system. They're sort of embedded. That's the whole concept of coaching, is that it's that embedded support. It's not go away somewhere, get it, and I hope you have good luck implementing it. It's here's what it is, and I'll be here all year long to help you implement it. Ready for more? So now as we kind of enter the more financial aspect of where we're going with the district, it's important to consider enrollment because that has a direct impact on equalized pupil, which has a direct impact on building budgets. And as you can see, our enrollment has a very clear downward trend. I only projected out to FY24. This downward trend continues beyond FY24. It gets way less reliable the further out you go. But I thought this sort of multi-year perspective gives you an idea of where we're going. And you'll see a little bit of this specific to equalized pupils on another slide. But no doubt we're losing students. In the last 10 years, we've lost 300 students. That's more than exist at Bristol. It's more than exist at any other 2 elementary schools combined. And it's almost half of what's sitting at Mount A right now that we've lost in 10 years. It's significant.
So one time you had said you thought it would bottom out at around 1,300. Are you still seeing that?
Yeah, we may dip a little under 1,300, and then I think it'll just kind of, plus or minus 1,300. But I do think that's true. More or less what we're seeing now is around 95 to 100 kindergartners coming in, and we're 115 to 120, 25 seniors graduating. There are some exceptions to that. Our current 10th grade class is pretty small, but the ninth grade class right behind them is pretty large. So it kind of balances out over the course of those 2 years. But yeah, we're looking at, double-digit student enrollment drops each year for the foreseeable future. And so obviously, as the numbers of students enrolled declines, that has an impact on class size, and that's something that we have some guidelines that help us think about. And it very clearly has an impact on the budget as well in terms of the amount of staff we have relative to the number of students that we have. So these are the guidelines that we currently operate with. There's a board policy that says that the superintendent will create guidelines that are sort of reflective of state guidelines, et cetera. These are the state guidelines. So this is sort of what we're adhering to as it currently stands. These are our current class sizes, and I have taken the optimal average range from these guidelines to give you a sense of where our class sizes are relative to the optimal average range. Not so much the maximum average, but the optimal average range. So you can see K through 6, we're on the upper end of the optimal average range, and even just a tad over in the 3-4 groupings. And we're actually a bit under, we're right in the middle of it for 7-8, but we're a bit under the minimum end of the optimal average range at the 9-12 level. Part of that's because one of the struggles as a secondary school loses enrollment is when we reduce staffing at a secondary level, it often means we're reducing programming. And there's been great resistance, for good reason, to not want to eliminate programming offerings at the secondary level. So the result of that is we have class sizes that may not fit within that optimal range that we're targeting. So there is an efficiency component there that we kind of miss a bit, but it's for the purpose of keeping a breadth of programming. And so you see, some classes at the high school have single digits in them because of, so you might see an AP Calc course maybe is a good example of one that is going to have 6 or 8 or 9 kids in it, which might be so small that you'd say, well, we shouldn't have that class. But if we don't have that class, that means that course is no longer offered and students don't get an opportunity for AP Calc. So there's a desire to keep those opportunities, in particular for those higher level courses. So we just sort of, we sort of live with the fact that we're going to have some smaller class sizes to be able to do that.
I know this is a weeds question, but, so when you're talking about AP classes and 4 or 8 students, is there a state law where you can't do that by virtual learning? Like Virgin's, Mount Abe, and Middlebury could have a combined AP Calc class?
There's not a law I'm aware of that says it
Okay.
couldn't happen that way. In fact, I think in a lot of schools smaller than Mount Abe, that's probably the reality. The number of virtual high school classes is probably greater in some of those smaller schools to be able to do that.
Pooling resources
Yeah.
and consolidating.
Yeah, and I think it would be interesting,
An idea.
you know,
And I'm sure you've thought about it. but-
Virginia's isn't that far away, Middlebury's not that, I don't know that it has to be so virtual. Like I'd be curious as we continue as school districts, because we're not the only school district getting smaller, as school districts get smaller, to think more regionally about how can we work together to offer the depth of programming that we want in an efficient sort of economic way. Like we need to continue to keep some options like that open. Yeah, and I think there's some interest in doing that. So I don't know exactly where it'll go, but those are things that I think people are open-minded to.
Because I'm certainly all for keeping those kinds of things available, but at some point, our budget's just, it's doing what it's doing.
Yeah. Well, it's that tricky balancing act, right? It's the cost effectiveness and the realization that education is expensive, but wanting to offer the kind of programming that we want. Kristen?
Is the Middlebury district and the Virgins district experiencing similar patterns of decline? We're all pretty much neck and neck.
Yeah, we're starting from different places, but I think we're
Right.
all seeing that decline for sure.
Same pace, like we're not,
Yeah.
okay.
As a I'm sorry.
It was unrelated to that, so if you want to comment on that.
So as a
first.
commentary to that, in Monday's Addison, there was an article about Virginia's Union High School and their budget woes. You could take Mount Abe and substitute for
Substitute
Virginia,
out.
and it's just identical issues.
Only they're maybe even a little bit in more of a sort of dire situation in that I think they're much closer to the spending threshold. Maybe we're even over the spending threshold at one
There's a
point,
fear there.
which is there's a significant cost to being over that spending threshold. So yeah, we're not in great shape. There are definitely those that are sort of in more difficult situations than we are, and some that are better.
And this is unrelated to that, but is the optimal average range also mirroring a state guideline, like our policy?
Yes,
Class
so
size guide.
everything here in these guidelines are
Oh, sorry,
reflective.
that was on the other chart too.
Yeah, so I just pulled that optimal average column
Okay.
and put it next to our class sizes to
Yeah.
kind of have that side-by-side comparison for you, so you didn't have to try and flip back and forth between the slides.
I'm curious what the maximum average is.
Curious what we had, so.
Well, I mean, the maximum average is
An
kind of an
oxymoron.
oxymoron. And I know some issues have come up about maximum class sizes. And I know
Yeah. So that I can explain the difference between a maximum class size and maximum average. Maximum class size of 20 means there isn't a K1 or 2 or any combination class that exceeds 20. Maximum average means all of our K classes combined can't average more than 20. So one could have 22, one could have 18. We're within the maximum average of 20 in that scenario. If the maximum is 20, our 22 exceeds, and we would be in violation of this guideline. So it is somewhat oxymoronic, but absolutely has an impact.
But if somebody was to ask, do we have a situation where we actually have like 4 16s and 3 28s? Is any of that going on?
No. 4 28s, no. So I can give an example in the K2. So we have, that I'm aware of, a single K1 class of 23, I think, 22 or 23. And I don't know that there are any others exceeding 20. So when taken together, the average of our K2 groupings is not exceeding 20. But we do have, for sure, it's a K1 class that exceeds 20.
And is there a maximum, not just a maximum average, but is there a maximum?
Currently, no.
Okay,
And it's interesting, like it's all relative, right? So we hear the teacher strike in California, they're fighting to get class sizes of 30 because they're at 40. And I think we would be hard pressed to get even close to class sizes averaging 25 at the elementary levels in Vermont. So it's all very relative. 25 by Vermont standards is high. 25 by lots of other places in our country, people would kill for it. I heard a teacher in Middlebury who came from Miami, had 40 students in her art class, 13 of them on the autism spectrum. There was no other adult in her classroom. She came to Middlebury, had class sizes of 13, and she said, I feel like I've died and gone to teacher heaven. It's all relative. It's all relative. Class size conversation.
Demographic trends, I think that maybe the state population is declining in general, but I wonder, is that true of Chittenden County? I mean, are we close enough that the apparent growth in Heinsberg and such might start to spill over?
It's true everywhere but Chittenden County.
Right.
Every other area in Vermont is seeing declining population, not Chittenden County. I don't know that Chittenden County is necessarily growing a lot. I think it is growing, but it's definitely not declining.
Right, I'm just wondering if we might start in the next 10 or 15 years to see, Moncton, for example, being the next, growing community like Heinsberg.
Yeah, it's close enough.
That's what I think.
I commute to Burlington frequently, and it's 20 miles.
The question is, in what way is it going to grow?
Right.
Is it going to grow with an aging population, which is happening in our state, or is it going to grow with a younger population that has students that will be entering the system?
It'll be interesting to see how that.
The demographic trend right now is not that it's younger families with students in our system, that it's going to grow, but it's going to be growing with people not in the workforce, not having students in the education system.
And Chittenden County only has pockets of growth. It's not
Fair.
Heinsberg, Charlotte, not all of those towns are growing.
I recently
There
saw
are only a few of them that really are.
they sort of broke down over the last maybe 20 years the percent decrease in student population in regions in Vermont. It might have been by county, actually. And I want to say Northeast Kingdom, maybe Essex County, in the last 10 or 20 years, I forget the number, lost about 40% of its student body. Addison County was around 20% of its student body. And we certainly, we pretty much reflect that.
Okay. Yeah, so we might see an improvement in sort of the tax base, but not the student population or something.
Yeah.
All right, fair.
Unless we do something about it. And I think that's part of there's some motivation at the state level to try to think about how do we try and reverse that trend. Incentives for young families to move here, telecommute, whatever it might be.
Sure.
And I think we'll continue to see efforts at the state level to try and do that to help improve that situation.
And I would add to that we also need to work on keeping our kids here. Not trying to get them to come back, but actually keep them here.
Yep.
Spanning your horizons and all that is good, but we also, if we have better industry and all that stuff,
Right.
then they'd be willing to stay.
Go do your thing maybe, but come back soon.
Or just have a really nice place to do your thing here.
Exactly. Numbers. Hey, what you've all been waiting for. So, in an effort to not make staffing reductions, realizing that 75 or 80% of our budget is related to staffing expenses, combined with another significant drop in equalized pupil, that formula leads to a large increase in the cost per equalized pupil. Something like 8.17%, in fact, which for those who are new to our conversations, that's like, wow, that's a huge number. For everyone else that's been part of our conversation is like, wow, they got it down to 8.17. And I do want to acknowledge that there's considerable effort on the parts of a lot of people to get this increase per equalized pupil down to 8.17%. Since the last time we met, this has been as high as 10% per equalized pupil. and we brought it down closer to 8. Every 1% decrease in equalized pupil, given our sort of situation here, is $242,000 in reduced education spending, not expenses, but education spending. So that's pushing $500,000 in reductions in education spending to get from our 10% to almost 8%. And that's been a lot of heavy lifting on a lot of people's parts to figure out where can we possibly save, because there are very few places to go not related to personnel, and we're adhering to not making personnel cuts. The reality is, if this board or if our community doesn't support this budget, I'm going to assume that means it needs to be a lower number, not a higher number. And that will mean we have to go to personnel again to get any more money. The only other alternatives, which I suppose we could exercise, but I would advise strongly against, are take money away from facilities, which I suppose now is a good time to let the board know. We have an incident at the high school recently where some tiles fell off in the shower room in the boys' locker room. There's some sort of a leak in the wall in that shower room that caused these tiles, the adhesive to sort of no longer take hold, and tiles fell off. In peeling the tiles back, good news is no asbestos. Bad news is mold. So we're in the process of getting contractors in to eliminate the mold. The way contractors who are eliminating mold work is they don't come in and say, we'll eliminate the mold in this room. They say, we stop tearing apart when we stop finding mold. We don't know what that's going to mean. If it means a complete overhaul of the locker room, I'm estimating that's $250,000. So that's sort of the next unknown $250,000 surprise. Thinking about the gym floor a couple of years ago, if we chip away at the $1 million or chip away at the money that we have to be able to put into facilities, we run the risk of not being able to take care of those things when they surprise us. Not to mention the fact that so that's now probably potentially $250,000 that could have been allocated to safety that now can't be allocated to safety, although in a way is really going to safety because eradicating the mold is safety, but it's not something we planned on addressing relative to safety. So I would advise against taking away from facilities because, in particular at the high school, it's an aging facility with significant need, and we need to be able to some way or another address that need. The other place we could go is the fund balance that we're looking at, the portion of the fund balance that we're looking at applying to a capital reserve fund. I'll talk a little bit more why that's a bad idea in a couple of slides. So outside of those two areas, really the only place we can go is personnel.
Was the effort to get from 10 to 8% like chipping away at pencils and paper clips, or what?
Not so much. We mostly left supplies alone, maybe a little bit there. There are some things that haven't historically been grant funded that we've been grant funding. We had a lot of non-reimbursable expenses in special education that we had some conversations around the need to change some practices to make more special education time reimbursable. There were some lines that are sort of quasi-insurance related, like so we have some lines for tuition to sort of out-of-district placements. So occasionally students need support that we can't offer, and they need to get some specialized support outside of district. We never really know ahead of, or we know sometimes know ahead of time, but oftentimes there are some unknown students that sort of pop that need that support. So we put a fair bit of money in lines to help address that need. We haven't historically been spending that, so we kind of trimmed some of those areas back. So where we have been ultra conservative in the past, we don't have the luxury now to be as conservative. So it's a bit of a risk, kind of like cutting back on your insurance coverage, but it felt like the prudent thing to do given our situation. And so it's really a combination of dozens of lines, some bigger than others, that achieve that. But not so much supplies, I don't think.
Not much.
No.
Did you shut the heat off today, or?
No, only at my house. My furnace died last night, so I saved some oil money at my house, but not by design. So kind of getting back to the numbers, so you can see this is our total expenses, which is a significant increase from where we were last year. think it's about 6.6%. What I find interesting is, it's a little over 3% from where we were 2 years ago, which is, maybe I just tell myself this to feel better about what we're doing, but when I think about a 3% increase over 2 years, when we go back to the way we used to build budgets, an average of 1.5% increase in expenses would be celebrated, right? Sort of the standard was around a 3% increase annually, so to have a 3% increase over the course of 2 years could be celebrated. Only now, which is the whole declining enrollment thing is the reason we don't do that anymore, because when you're losing lots of students to increase by 3% in total expenses hasn't historically, it wouldn't be acceptable by today's standards. So from an overall expenses, though it's a large number and it's a big jump from last year, because of the $1 million in reduction in expenses, it does seem disproportionately large in terms of a jump. Our revenue did go up, which makes sense. Typically, when your expenses go up, you have expenses that are eligible for reimbursement, in particular special education, which had some significant increases from last year to this year. That generally increases your revenue. And so, the difference between your expenses and your revenue is your education spending, and that's the figure that's divided amongst your equalized pupil to give you your cost for equalized pupil. And so you can see our education spending has gone up by almost $1.5 million. Meanwhile, our equalized pupil has gone down by over 34. Credit to Howard, when he was sort of spitballing where we'd land, I think 1475.05 maybe is what you projected in October. And after a moving target for the last 3 months, this has been certainly my craziest year with equalized pupil. For you as well?
The closest. I don't see how you can get any closer.
No. And in fact, equalized pupil is not locked in even today. February 7th?
February 7th will be the lock date, and as that'll be the lock date if all the schools that are not assigned yet get their budgets aligned and get done. We have a forced Act 46 this year.
For what it's worth, as challenging as building a budget has been for us, there are some school districts that don't know if they're building a budget for one district or multiple districts right now, like even probably as of today. So there are far more complicated situations out there, not to minimize the challenges that we have. So the result is a spending per equalized pupil of $17,927.76. The cap is $18,311. This figure doesn't accurately reflect where we are relative to the cap. We're a couple $100 lower than that relative to the cap. There are some expenses that, if you exceeded the cap, come out of your cost per equalized pupil. But if you don't exceed the cap, they don't come out. Whatever sense that makes. But because we're not exceeding, those don't come out. If we were a few $100 more per student, they'd knock a couple $100 off, which would get us back under the cost per equalized pupil. Did I pretty much summarize that right, Howard? All right.
So we're not as close as it looks.
Correct. We're more like 17.7-ish relative to 18.311. So we're fairly safe under the spending threshold. Although each year, again, as our...
$1,300.
What comes out is debt service on the bond, also MAUSD teachers retirement for the added amount of 6% that they established 3 years ago, and also the extraordinary portion of special ed that the state assigns us, that also gets to come into it.
So another plug for a bond. Instead of that $1 million in construction services that we're sort of chipping away at things, if that were applied to a bond payment, that comes out. That doesn't count against us toward the cost per equalized pupil as we approach that threshold. So that $1 million would be a pretty significant decrease in the cost per equalized pupil. So
Howard, did you say the current debt service is included in that? Or?
The debt service per equalized pupil is about $136. It comes out of that. It would come out of that $17,928, but we have to show this as an equalized pupil cost. But for the approval of how much you can get to the 18,311, certain issues are allowed to subtract from that.
So that would then be.
That's right. So if you had a construction bond and you didn't get it approved by the Secretary of State, that would not come out of there. It would be added in, and chances are you'd probably exceed the amount of 18,311, which is the maximum.
But I think the answer to your
50% penalty for any dollar. So 50 cents on the dollar, the penalty.
It's a big penalty. But I think the answer to your question is this does include debt service costs.
The current.
Yep.
Right. But if we were to exceed the threshold, that would come off. So I wanted to kind of give you an overview of the changes FY20 over FY19. So the increase in expenses was a little over $1.9 million, and I wanted to give you a little bit of a breakdown as to where that 1.9 came from. So you can see a large portion of that is related to salaries. So that's salaries, FICA, sort of everything connected to salaries. We have to make payments to the teachers' retirement system for teachers that are newer to education, that are trying to sort of catch up in their retirement pension. You may have heard they're having some retirement pension issues with that. So this is a mechanism for trying to help that situation. So all those things combined, $839,000 FY20 over FY19. Another almost $600,000 specifically in intensive needs for special education. So that again, those were some of those things that we talked about. Some needs shifting. Intensive needs typically means high cost. So, you know, on a student-to-student basis, we could be looking at an average of about $100,000 per student that has that intensive need. Does that seem pretty fair? So it doesn't take too many students to get to a pretty large dollar amount that we need to be able to budget for. Now again, this is looking at expense over expense. There's offsetting revenue in terms of the reimbursement for those intensive needs, but from an expense to expense perspective, has an impact.
But the way that that revenue is going to be distributed is changing.
Exactly.
So is this...
The budget we're building now is for last year.
Right, but
for
if
that.
this is a trend, are we concerned about that impact being more significant
Yes,
in future budgets?
I would say we are. I know I am. There's definitely concern. Because again, with the increased flexibility, which will be great, and we are very much looking forward to the opportunity for increased flexibility and not having to worry about, you know, this adult who has the ability to meet that student's needs, but that student doesn't have the right plan for that adult's time to be eligible, and that has an impact on the general fund. It's a pain, and it does, I won't say it prohibits, because we have built really healthy, non-reimbursable budgets so that we can have the flexibility to get the right adult with the right kid, regardless of what plan that student might be on, but it's at a cost. So the flexibility to not have to even really think about that so much is great, but it's going to be less money, and we'll need to think about, is there a better way? You know, I think about, so our total, we're looking at about $750,000 in the budget for out-of-district placement. I have to think Addison Central has similar expenses, Addison Northwest. That's another one of those ways where I wonder what opportunities might exist for us to collaborate and think about how we do that. Not just to save money, but to really also think about programming and what can we provide for students with those intensive needs. But I don't want to just save money for saving money's sake and the students suffer because we're trying to pinch pennies. We need to really be mindful of the outcomes for students that we desire as well.
But so essentially, though, the state is giving more flexibility and less funds to special education.
Not necessarily less funds. I think perhaps the same funds, but it's going to be distributed differently. And my sense is we are in a position where we are not going to receive more funds, and I don't anticipate even receiving the same funds. I don't know what your sense is on that, Susan.
Yeah, I know this has been a point of conversation because while this number looks large in comparison to a lot of districts, we're actually not spending as much money on these sorts of expenses, so that's good news. But it's certainly a concern as the intensive social emotional needs of kids in our country are expanding, you know, I know the special educators are concerned about that and trying to make sure that the legislature is clear about that, you know, this is a unique population that, you know, we have to serve.
In fact, there was a recent survey that was released that spoke to sort of ranked districts in terms of their spending in special education, and we were among the sort of lowest spending per student sort of in special education. So, despite the fact that we spend a lot in special education, we're really, I think we're being as frugal as anybody out there to find ways to do that effectively and efficiently. So health insurance, that was, where did that land? 11.9%, Howard? 11.8% increase in premiums.
Well, we have more people signing up.
Right, and more people taking it on. So that led to that $326,000 figure. Transportation going up. We talked about food service going up a little bit. You know, health insurance being a piece of that. And then all the other lines combined are around $115,000. So that basically is how we get to that $1.9 million increase in expenses. I also sort of gave you the breakdown of expenditures by category. I kind of grouped sort of like categories to give you an overall sense. I think our budget right now is 65 pages, which is, I don't know, 600 lines, something like that. Like it's, to have that level of detail, you can very much get lost in the weeds that Allison was talking about earlier. So this is an opportunity to sort of elevate that to give you a concept of where the money is spent in our budget. And so you can see almost 53% of it is in sort of the category of teaching and learning. Student support services is close to 20%. And it sort of drops from there in those broad categories.
Patrick, do coaches, interventionists go under student support services, or are they
Teaching and learning. Student support services is almost exclusively special education. Leadership in business, a case could be made that some of this is also really teaching and learning. So this is in the budget, it falls under the category of Office of the Principal. It would be fiscal services, Office of the Superintendent, those all sort of combine. But I think about, so in Betsy's Office of the Principal, there's money in there for periodicals and books and things that are very much related to teaching and learning. I didn't parse it out line by line. I really kind of stuck with sort of function and object codes. So again, a lot of this could be argued one way or the other, but this is to give you sort of a high-level overview of how we spend the money that we have. This sort of gives you a sense of, under those same categories, it's not exactly apples to apples, but it's quite close, just to give you a sense of where those shifts have taken place. So you can see a pretty significant shift in student support services. The bulk of that coming in that intensive support. And that led to that overall of 6.61 in our expenses.
So that 6.61 is Jen likes to point out the historical change figure.
Yes. Whereas historically, 3%-ish as at least in my experience, has been sort of the pretty universally accepted. If you hit 2%, that was considered pretty good. Anything under 2 was pretty remarkable. So 6.61 by historical standards would be very high. That's when I remind myself that it's only a little over 3% from 2 years ago. This is a little different perspective on how we can look at our spending. So because everything's really driven by equalized pupil and the cost of equalized pupil, this is sort of the graphic to help us see how our buddy Stu, this is Stu Dent right here, how the money that we spend really goes to that student. And you can see the bulk of it is teaching and learning and student support services. And then a fraction of it here, leadership and business, facilities, transportation, and food service.
Shouldn't food service be right about here?
It should. It should. So what's the impact on taxes? That's the big question, right? What does this mean for the taxpayer? Here are the tax rates. They're tremendously exciting, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because I think what ultimately matters is how many dollars does this mean on our assessed values. So I want to get to that point. But what you're looking at here is the homestead tax rate, which you can see is the same for all 5 towns. So that's part of being Act 46 now, is you start from the same place. Everybody has the same initial homestead tax rate. And then there are other things that kick in that change it. But from education spending purposes, everyone starts from the same place. We're in our second year of Act 46, or at least we're building our budget for the second year. So last year we got 8 cents off. This year we get 6 cents off. Next year it would be 4 cents, etc. So you see that 6 cent reduction. But there's a rule that says no town can have their tax rate change, their homestead tax rate change by more than 5% up or down. So that's sort of a limiting factor. So when we apply that 5% rule after that 6 cents, this is sort of where they land. So all of a sudden, even though we started with the same and we're subtracting the same amount, we apply that 5% rule and they land at different places. So that's the first stage of being different. The next stage of being different is each town has a different common level of appraisal. So the idea here is this is intended to be kind of a leveling factor, so that if one town has had a recent appraisal, another town has not had an appraisal recently, it would be unfair if there wasn't some sort of adjustment because of that. And so the towns, so typically if you have 100% is the perfect CLA. It means what your town has your home assessed at is comparable to what fair market value of that home is, and therefore taxing you on that value at 100% makes sense. The reality is almost nobody's at 100%. So this means the town has your home, if it's over 100%, the town has your home valued more than what fair market is. And so that has a reducing effect on your tax rate. So CLA over 100% is going to have a positive impact on your tax rate. It's going to lower it. CLA less than 100% is going to increase your tax rate. And so we see the CLAs for the different towns here, which then produces ultimately what the property tax rate is projected to be. Really, really, really important. This is a little shout out to Howard. Projected tax rates. Howard gets called every year, people saying when tax rates come out, Howard, you said the tax rates were going to be this, and I got my taxes and they came in at this. These are projected. There are a lot of factors that are going to change. The one thing I can about promise you is it's not going to be this for your tax rate. This is the projection right now, based on what they're estimating the yield to be. The yield is almost certainly going to change, which is going to change these tax rates. But that's the current projection based on our education spending. So the big question is, well, what does that mean here? So all of these cells just sort of show the tax rate for the homestead tax rate, but then ultimately after CLA, FY19 compared to what's projected for FY20. These are the actual FY19s, not what was projected to be FY19. And so you can see what the projected changes are, but in the end, what does that mean for each town per $100,000 of assessed value? And you can see the range is from about $50 reduction in Lincoln because their CLA went up, and they had a limiting factor on that 5% rule. Lincoln folks are going to see about a $50 reduction per 100,000. On the other end is Moncton, looking at about 110 increase per 100,000.
Yeah.
This has nothing to do with the fact that I recently moved to Lincoln. Putting that out.
I think maybe you should go.
Maybe actually not. We're going to.
Okay.
Or that we should have had the meeting in Lincoln.
Right, exactly, yes. So that's more or less where the presentation on this budget ends. But a question that I'm sure will be asked is, what would the impact be if we used all of that fund balance? Because I think if community members sitting here, or sitting at town meeting, or sitting at our annual meeting, seeing an 8% increase in the cost per equalized pupil, when last year it was, 0, 1, 2, maybe at the high end, they're going to ask, so you have this fund balance sitting out there, this $600,000 that you're not going to use to offset taxes, and we're going to pay 8% increase on equalized pupil, what would it do if we use that $600,000? So I have a few slides that'll help sort of articulate that. Kevin, you had a question?
I lost the 5% thing.
Okay. Go back to this.
So like Bristol in the first column, 16808, and it ends up, you take the 6 cents off, if I understand it. Goes out at 162, there's more than 5%. So all of a sudden, there's somebody losing money here, or what?
No, really the whole idea was recognizing that as we try to unify and sort of make more uniform the tax rates through education spending under Act 46, rather than towns having extreme changes from one year to the next as we all come to the same place, that 5% rule slowed that transition to everyone being in the same place.
But the budget number that you've got to raise has to be that 16034.
So this is right. So and that's where this all factors in. So the reality is these figures, which then applied to this CLA producing this tax rate, that is what gives the total district the amount of money that it needs. And the reality is it actually doesn't even come to the district. We education taxes are collected on a statewide basis and then distributed to towns. So that's part of what changes. That's why the yield changes. Because so right now the state is guesstimating where all of the budgets in the state are going to land. And that guesstimation is what produces the yield. And Howard, jump in because we're getting deep now.
You're correct.
So the guesstimation is what leads them to saying this is what we think the yield is going to be. Once all the budgets are adopted, then the state has the actual money they need to raise through taxes to support education in the state. Then they'll set the yield for real to raise that amount of money so that they can then distribute that out to the school districts based on the budgets they said they needed.
Once the 4 years that we have 3 years left in the program, we started 1 year late with the 10 cent saving, the 8 cent, and the 6. Once that's over, everybody will have the same tax rate other than CLA. There won't be any plus or minus 5.
Within our 5 towns.
That's correct.
And we may get there sooner. Every year, towns are getting closer. So we may, like next year, there may be one town that had been an outlier that won't be an outlier next year. So whether it takes all the years to get there or not is a little unclear.
So I still don't understand. I just don't want to think about this chart.
Okay.
It's all going to work out, right?
Take it away.
Yes. The state will ultimately give us the money that the voters approve. But they're not going to necessarily give us the money that this board adopts. It really takes the act of the voters to say, yes, we approve this budget. That's what the state then says, okay, so that's your budget. We're going to add that to everybody else's budget. This is how much the education fund needs to dish out to schools based on what passed town meeting day or passed sometime after town meeting day. And we're going to set the yield to make sure that tax rates give us that amount of money so we can reapportion it out.
So essentially, if we vote a high percentage, that gets spread out across the state.
You got it.
Everybody pays for our large increase.
Yep.
Because they're expecting about a 3% statewide, somewhere like that.
3.24 is.
Yeah, that was the original estimate.
But that's why there's a penalty as well.
Yep. And so this year, at about a 1% increase in the cost per equalized pupil, we helped pay for everyone else that was higher than that. Next year, at 8%, there'll be a lot of people helping to bear the cost for us.
Was developed many months ago by rough estimates of people sending them data, and it changed. Things changed. The 11.8 on healthcare was not anticipated, so a lot of these got changed. So I think if you look at the number now, I don't have the statistic, but I'm sure it's higher than that.
And just a reminder, we don't know where the yield is going to be set, which impacts this, and equalized pupils is not set. So,
yeah, the yield's set right now at 10.666, and that could change.
Yeah.
Yeah, so your email, when you sent the presentation out, indicated that there were still some changes or that things were as firm as they were going to be for today. Can you talk about what's not firm?
Yield, equalized pupil, fund balance.
Fund balance is locked in because that's based on the audit.
Sure, but fund balance from this year. So that's, I guess, really thinking more about as we look forward to building next year, which we have to be thinking about this year. So it's less related to building FY20.
Yeah, so I guess my question was really kind of, so for me, I mean, I know these things always shift, but I don't think I've ever done a vote where we adopt a budget and the equalized pupil isn't firm. I mean, the wording of the warning specifically says what the spending for equalized pupil is and what the percent is, and if we don't know if that's the right, now, like, I feel concerned about adopting a legal document when we don't know that the numbers we're putting in it are right.
Well, so legally, what the way the article's read, and it's on the ballot for tonight, legally it says, shall the voters approve a budget of expenses of $30,950,000, which is estimated to be X cost per equalized pupil, which is estimated to be a certain percent of increase. Ultimately, what they're voting on is a dollar amount that they're approving to be spent. That won't change.
Someone at the state was really thinking when they drafted that required language, huh?
Yep.
Lawyers.
But that is the reality. Ultimately, like, what it could be is simply, do the voters approve spending this much money?
Right.
Everything else was just intended to try to give more information that, with numbers not set, is subject to change. And that's why it says estimated, but I don't know that everybody sees it as estimated.
And the reason why they're not locked is because we still have those towns that are under force, and there's lawsuits that have been filed against the AOE to try to stop some of this, and that's why.
And there are bills introduced in the legislature.
I in no way was trying to, like, I understand it doesn't come from you. I feel like
No.
every year we have the conversation that the state has to get these numbers figured out. And this year it's even worse than it's ever been.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
there's a
it
coefficient.
is absolutely ridiculous. Like,
And there's a coefficient on equalized pupils that once they have everything in there, that coefficient will change. That's why that 1475.75 may move a little bit. Yeah, not much, but it could.
well, maybe our VSBA rep will talk about it with our VSBA, is the things that they should be advocating. I'm sure that they already are advocating, but I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous.
I can assure you that the Vermont Superintendents Association, the Vermont Principals Association, the Vermont School Board, Vermont School Business Officials Association, they are all advocating at the state level saying, come on, you're killing us with this.
Well, it's just odd if they don't find some way to get a year ahead of this situation.
Yeah, but
It's all
use
process
last year's
improvement.
numbers to set this
Businesses
year's
have to
budget.
do it. Like the
Yeah.
state.
Get the right number for when we need it next year.
and that's let alone the reality that we are building a budget for something that starts several months from now. We don't know what's going to happen the rest of the months of this year that are going to impact the spending that we need for next year. So, yeah, there's a whole lot that is complicated in how we build budgets. I guess, yeah, period. That's it. Oh, we did.
But all that being said, I mean, as a voter thinking about a number, we're still talking about being within like 1 or 2% of accurate, probably. I mean, we're
Yes, for sure.
quite
Yeah.
close. So, you know, for me, if we're talking about, okay, so my tax bill at the end of the year is going to change $30 or $40 one way or the other, you know, based on these kind of variables.
Yep.
You know,
That's pretty much what we're talking about.
right. Kind of think about a big picture. And yeah, so for, I don't know what an average value in Moncton is, $250,000, $300,000 property or something like that. We're talking for, you know, $300 maybe increase. Okay.
And maybe a little less than that. Probably the median is closer to, $225.
Yeah.
But our voters are only going to see the big number of the budget and the cost per equalized pupil. They're not going to see the CLA. They're not going to see this change per $100,000 of assessed value.
Right. They're going to see
So-
the total number,
Right.
cost per student, and the percent increase
Which is
in the cost per student.
Always the
Right.
problem with
Right.
bonds and school budgets and things is they see the $30 million, and that's all anybody can look at.
Right.
They don't see that it's actually $200 or $300 on your total annual taxes.
And in this, they'll also see 8.17%,
Right.
which will be a sticker shock
Scary.
value as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, they won't
Thankfully-
see
I don't
the 6
understand
point,
why they're
Right.
seeing this.
6 point.
Right.
That's why we need to get lots of people to show up at, like tonight's meeting. Our annual meeting in February.
Yeah.
And why Neat TV is so helpful to try and get the word out. Like, this is all understandable if people are engaged and are interested in knowing what it is they're voting on, try to sort of conceptualize it.
And $200 or $300 is understandable, and you can decide whether you like it or hate it.
Right, that's concrete.
$30 million you can't relate to.
Yeah, you have
Exactly.
no idea what that
And the
is.
cost per student, you couldn't relate to.
Right.
And there's so much more behind the 8.2%
Sure.
than what the surface would show. Yeah. We're going to talk about some more things that will be complicated when voters go to the polls that they won't have a lot of information on in the next couple of slides.
So we just need to print out a big thing and put them on every poll that has this slide.
You can't do that.
I know.
But I do think the message here is, how do we inform the electorate? Okay, how do we as a board, or how do we as a school district inform the electorate? Not necessarily advocate one way or the other, although of course if we adopt a budget, we want everyone to pass it. It makes sense. But just to inform people, like my goal in every big vote that we've ever had is, as long as people arrive at the polls and understand what it is they're voting on, I can live with whatever way they vote. Where I have a hard time is knowing how many people go uninformed and vote, and it has a significant impact, which is very much related to the next few slides. So thinking about, in anticipation of the question, so what if we use the entire fund balance to help reduce that 8% down to something less? So again, we have a little over $1.5 million in fund balance from the prior year. And everything you've seen in building the budget so far uses the same amount of fund balance that we used to build the current year. And that leaves us with this $610,000 that isn't currently being applied to reduce taxes. If we use that entire fund balance, the cost per equalized pupil is 5.67. So immediately that sort of 8.17 goes down to 5.67. That's probably still perceived as a large number of taxpayers, so I don't know necessarily what the gain would be there. The greater concern for me, which connects back to a very early conversation at tonight's meeting, was, so that's pretty immediately going to make about $1 million impact on our revenue for next year. So that means either we make up that $1 million in increased taxes, or we make up that $1 million in reduced spending, i.e. staffing cuts. That's outside of any reduced revenue we might see in special education, or any increased costs we might see in salaries and benefits and healthcare. I'm sort of, what's that?
Does that mean that you're not anticipating the 380 or something?
Say that again? Oh, right. So I'm estimating that 380 doesn't stick. That 380 is probably going to grow. I think as we get closer, Howard talked about health insurance being fully encumbered to arrive at that 380. I don't anticipate we're going to realize our full exposure in health insurance. So that 380 is probably going to be 500,000, maybe a little bit more, which puts us at around that $1 million decrease. So if we applied 1.5 million to offset taxes next year, and our fund balance this year is about 500,000, that's $1 million drop in revenue that we have to make up for in cuts or increased taxes. On top of everything else, and declining enrollment, which I think is going to predict us to have decreased equalized pupil, my assumption is that $1 million, if we did this, on top of everything else, probably gives us a $2 million hole to dig out. That will come almost exclusively from personnel. So when you start thinking about what that means, it's huge. All the change we made to get to this year was half of that.
Can you say again how you get to 2 million?
So 1 million alone, right off the bat, is a drop in revenue here. We also probably will see a drop, or at least I'm anticipating a drop in revenue in special education. And then you have increased expenses going up and equalized pupil going down. All of those things kind of creating the perfect storm of a large sum of money that we're going to have to reduce by to even stay around 5 or 6 or 7% probably increase in the cost per equalized pupil, let alone if we're trying to get down to the 1, 2, 3% again.
Next budget season is just going to be nasty.
Well, yeah, and we have an opportunity now as a community to determine just how nasty it's going to be. And my advice is let's make it as not nasty as possible. So let's not use $1.5 million to reduce taxes, and let's sort of try and live with the 8% this year, so that it makes next year feasible.
I think at the first meeting when you presented the idea of the reserve fund, I think you said that we would have to have that voted on.
Yes.
So I didn't notice in the packet, and maybe I missed it, but is that something that we also need to discuss tonight?
Yes, and I have an updated sort of warning and a ballot for you that includes that language.
Okay.
So here's where it kind of comes back to informing the electorate when they go to the polls. The ballot will have 2 articles. One article is, shall the voters approve the school district creating this capital reserve fund and putting the $610,000 into it? If the answer is yes, great, because then all these other numbers make sense. If the answer is no, automatically the result is, well, then that $600,000 goes back to the taxpayers. And that means we're applying the entire $1.5 million fund balance to offset taxes, creating this scenario that is very undesirable for next year. And the cost per equalized pupil goes down. Total expenses stays the same. So still, it might have been you, Jen, that was mentioning things moving and feeling like we're sort of out of line there. Even in that scenario, that $30,950,000 stays. It's the revenue that changes, which changes the ed spending, which changes the cost per equalized pupil. But the expenses stay the same. And that's what voters ultimately vote on.
So, Patrick, the limitations on using the capital reserve, because if you're thinking that you might need it for a fund balance carryover, can it be used for that in lieu of a capital expense?
So the limitation, as I understand it, is only in what we can get the voters to vote on.
Right.
Because to access that money that's in the capital reserve fund requires a vote of the electorate. It can be at a special meeting or it can be at an annual meeting, but it requires a vote of the electorate. So if we wanted to use $500,000 to fix the roof at the high school, we have a special meeting or an annual meeting. There's an article that says, do you approve spending $500,000 to fix the high school, or some, depending on how specific we have for information, the language of the article can be written. Or if we wanted to use $500,000 to make some other purchase, it could be awarded for that, or it could be used to offset taxes. That capital reserve fund has a lot of potential uses, all of which require a vote of the electorate. So that's sort of the scenario in terms of numbers if we use all of those funds. This is the impact on the cost. So I have here what it would cost then per $100,000 if we used all of the fund balance. And this is the difference from if we only use what I'm proposing. So the range is from $0 to $40 difference per 100,000. Between using it all or using what I recommended.
And Lincoln stays the same because of the 5% rule.
Right. And mind you, I'm projecting maybe, hopefully, somewhere around $500,000 or $600,000 fund balance at the end of this year after health insurance does its thing. We're still applying $900,000. So we're still looking at a few $100,000 potentially in drop in revenue, just not $1 million.
So it seems to me that doesn't really it's still a big number. It's a big number no matter how you look at it. Like, I think that if we can explain it, and that's the trick, right? If we can explain it, I think it makes sense. I want you to say again what you said about the warning, because I think what I heard you say is that so it'll be on one ballot, and so if the voters say, yes, we approve the budget, no, we don't approve the reserve fund, then just automatically we go to this scenario? And that's the only option? I guess that there's not, like, if they don't approve the reserve fund, there's not anything else that can be done with that money.
Well, because the only other option is something we can't do, which is, do you approve putting $600,000 in the reserve fund or $500,000 500,000 or 400,000, like choose door number 1, door number 2, door number 3, which we can't do on a ballot in an election.
Can we simply say, we want to hold this as a fund balance carryover for the next budget cycle?
I think that would be misleading because that may not in fact be what we end up doing with the money. Like putting it in a capital reserve fund could be used for that, could be used for something else. In my mind, the intention behind this is additional funds that we can use to address some facilities needs, especially when we're talking about some big ticket items that what we have budgeted doesn't cover. And in the event we don't ever pass a bond, we would never be able to address. So if because we can build this capital reserve fund over time. We could put 600,000 in next year, 100,000 in the following year, et cetera, build it up to some substantial money, which combined with the money we have budgeted positions us to be able to tackle some of the bigger problems that our facilities might have in the event we don't pass a bond.
No, I understand the value of it. I was just curious if that was one other option, was to simply say, hey, we're holding it for a rainy day budget fund or something.
Yeah, I guess my recommendation would be not to limit ourselves to something as specific as that.
I think that a lot of people can get behind the idea of saving for something that you want to have in the future. So I think that that's a very fiscally responsible thing to do, and that's why, as I understand it, we're asking for the money.
Yeah. Well, so I think about there's a pretty engaged community group right now involved in assessing the indoor air quality in our schools. So we're there, mid-February, I think, is when we're looking at those assessments to take place. We may find from those assessments that we need to do significant improvements to our HVAC systems, perhaps particularly at the high school. That's a big ticket item. Our $1 million doesn't begin to touch replacing the HVAC system just at Mount Abe, let alone if there's anything at other schools to happen. So if that's something that is decided it needs to happen and it's not part of a bigger renovation, we could save over a few years and perhaps accrue enough money to tackle a project like that that's been identified as a priority. So that's the advantage. And in a way, do that in a way that actually earns us interest as that sits in a bank account for a couple of years rather than take out a loan that we're paying interest on. So for many reasons, it makes sense to sort of put that money away for those sorts of projects.
So, in the past, we haven't had to do these two separate ballots, correct? We've always applied the full fund balance to the following year's budget.
Correct.
So, this 1.5 million fund balance that we have is actually kind of an anomaly.
Yes.
And the year before was also kind of an anomaly because that was 900,000. And the year before was like 500,000, I think. So we're trying to be fiscally responsible by putting forth this additional article. Is that what it is? We have 2 articles on one ballot?
Yes.
So this year we have 2 articles, but it's because of things that have happened in the past.
Yeah. And the goal really is to get the amount of money that we apply from our fund balance to offset taxes to be a figure that we are confident we can sustain. So that we're not creating more obstacles in creating budgets for future years. I honestly don't think 900,000 is sustainable. But I also recognize we're putting forth an 8.17% increase in equalized pupil. So pulling that back to 400,000, which makes that 8-point-something%, 10-point-something%, or 11-point-something%, probably doesn't pass the straight face test either. So this is sort of a happy medium as we work to get that fund balance carried forward down to something that's sustainable, because it's the fiscally responsible thing to do. As much as 8% can feel fiscally responsible. That's the sell, right? That's the hard part. To help everyone understand how 8% increase in equalized pupil represents a fiscally responsible budget. So, that's the end.
So before we before we move, I want to give one last opportunity for community members to give any comments if they'd like. then we're going to go back to our usual structure where we're just going to talk and have a public comment at the end. But if you have something you want to add at this point, I'm willing. Anyone else has something?
Can I say something really quick? Having sat on the board for a long time, I'm concerned about getting this information out in the proper way. I feel like this is going to be a really hard budget to sell to the community. So you guys got your work cut out for you. So that's big. We've never had. I mean, it's just, you know, and taxes went up so much last year. I think people are still looking for the Act 46 savings, you know, so there's just all these. Anyway, so that's just my 2 cents.
I'll just add one thing, I guess, at this point that we've been talking about how the 21 budget is going to be horrendous. But we've also started talking today about collaborating with Virginia Middlebury. It seems to me like that's what I gotta do. If the grammar's correct.
Works for me.
To even make it through the next year's budget.
Yeah. Agreed. Which is an efficiency that goes beyond Act 46, right? That's
fairly exciting, actually.
I agree. Complicated and there's a lot of mess to it, but very much exciting. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else have any public comment? All right. Oh.
I'd just like to add to Shauna's comment about this is going to be a tough sell. So this is extremely complicated in terms of how we're explaining these numbers. And the vocal dissenters do not appreciate the complicatedness of this. And just based on other things I've been through with other budget or other votes, I don't think we can say if we get a no vote on this, it's because it's too high and we have to go low. My hope is that enough people will get informed and will create a strategy to inform the public as to how complicated this is. And we are being fiscally responsible, because it's not going to get any easier either.
Well, I think to that point, if I reflect back to our conversations this time last year and recognizing the hard work and putting forth a budget that was a 1% increase in equalized pupil when we lost 30-something or 50-something equalized pupil, and all the staffing reductions it took to do that, I think we reduced something like 15 positions. And if you remember, as we were talking, I said this is really hard to do right now. And if we don't do it, we're in big trouble next year. Imagine if we had 15 additional staff members right now that were built into this budget. That's another $1 million on top of what we see right here, right now. We'd be looking at 12% or something like that of an increase in the cost per equalized pupil instead of 8%. So I don't want to lose the fact that there was a ton of hard work and some hard decisions that this board made this time last year to put us in as good a shape as we are in building next year. And again, it's hard, that's the hard sell because it doesn't feel like we're in really good shape at 8%. But it took a lot of effort to keep it at 8%.
Krista?
Who strategizes how we do the hard sell?
We are going to. It's later on in
Oh,
our
it is.
agenda as we prep for the town at our annual meeting, so we'll get to that.
Yeah. Okay.
We don't have to do it right now. We're going to get to that. Just remember our time, and we're kind of stretching.
Well, to that point, I mean, I guess it's a concern I have that, you know, I've been thinking about or hearing about the budget since, you know, November and still have a hard time getting my head around it, and I just wonder what support may be available to our district to help us figure out how to communicate really effectively what it is we want to say and how, because it's really important, and I think putting the full weight of that on this small group of folks that are volunteers is very it's a large undertaking, and it's a really important undertaking. So I just, think about districts that have, full-time PR people. Clearly, we don't have that. But I just, I want to make sure that we're not trying to figure out how to do this well at 10 o'clock on a snowy night, and then that's how we're going to ensure we pass the budget that we think is the right one. So.
All right, we'll keep moving along. All right, down to board management and governance update from the Community Engagement Committee. The minutes from that meeting, the last meeting, were included in your packet. And Krista, do you have anything you want to add?
Sure. I'll just say really quickly that our group is a really great mix of community members and board members, and we're kind of morphing into this almost sort of steering committee that sees ourselves as sort of planning a structure that utilizes, kind of to the point I was just making before, that finds ways to bring in lots of people, not just those at the board table, so that we are engaging as diverse a representation of our community as possible in what's happening in our schools, and getting input from as diverse a group of people as possible. So the thing that we're really focusing on right now is planning for a workshop that will be facilitated by Sue McCormick on March 16th, hoping hopefully in the Bristol cafeteria, but that's still to be determined. But the goal of that workshop is to build a diverse planning team, again, beyond just this small representative sample, that will help us to guide and implement our overarching community engagement initiative. And that will be the way that we move forward on different decisions we have to make as a district, including things like the bond. So there's lots of issues that are really important that we are facing and are going to continue to face, and we want to figure out the best ways to communicate with folks and to gather input and support for the things that we think we need for our schools. So starting with that March 16th workshop to build that team. And I think that's about where we're at now. I don't know if Liz or Andrew wants to add anything to that.
I would just say that the hope would be that after this process, that there would be structures in place, so when you have something like every year with the budget, you have a system in place for getting the word out and communicating with as many people as possible. So I think that's our hope, would be that next year there'll be some sort of process in place for informing everyone about changes and everything that's going on.
Okay, good. All right. Any questions? Okay. Next is the legislative update from the VSBA, and Caleb was running late, and he did text me and say that he would let me know what time he was passing his house, and I said, we're fine, go home, kind of thing. So from the VSBA standpoint, we have Sarah, who happens to be serving on that board.
We do, very, very fresh. But so do you guys all receive their legislative updates they send? So they're working on a variety of things right now. I guess I should say we are working on a variety of things. One is the legislative updates that came out in the last VSBA report, was that Governor Scott delivered the budget address in which he says he's prioritizing education. The House Education Committee votes out the Ethnic Studies bill, and the House Education Committee is taking testimony on Act 46 delays. They're in the process of that, and they're also the Senate Education Committee is taking testimony on the lead testing in all the schools throughout Vermont, which the governor says that he wants to go ahead and test. There's a last VSBA meeting, most of us were by conference call because the weather was so bad, but there was conversation about a bill that would increase smoking age to 21. It also talked about vaping and making it so that vaping, you had to be 21 to vape. And there was pretty active dialogue about that, about, the rights of kids that are 18. And so there was no vote on that. Something else that the VSCPA issued a statement in response to Secretary French's thought exercise about making Vermont one district, and basically they just laid out all the reasons why that would not be a good idea. It'd be at the whim of politicians. Everything changes every 2 years. And so, Governor Scott definitely stepped back and said that that's not a plan, but there is some hints that this year in the legislature there may be some bills coming up in front of the House and Senate Education Committees that kind of step towards that, but they've made no commitment that that's a priority.
Can I just ask a question, Sarah? So when you said that the ethnic studies bill was voted out, does that mean they're not doing anything with it, or that it's moved from the House phase and then it goes on to the Senate?
My understanding is that it's going to go into the Senate, and the reason why they voted out is because it was too restricting.
Uh-huh.
That's my understanding.
Okay. So it's not a dead bill.
In the House, it is my understanding.
The cigarette bill?
No, this is the ethnic.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, sorry.
The cigarette bill has not happened.
I've read that white paper of Secretary French's, and it's a radical plan, but I think there's a lot of good thought in it. And I was a little disappointed that the VSBA just flatly said it's not good, without potentially, or appears that they didn't consider it seriously before they made the statement. There's pros and cons to it.
Right.
I'd just like to comment to Kevin. We just went through Act 46, and that was extremely complicated and involved and exhausting. And during the budget discussion, Patrick mentioned there are lawsuits on some of the districts that aren't even finalized yet. So to suggest that we attempt to do a one district structure now is just mind-boggling. So for me, I think it comes from him being a new Secretary of Education and not having the encounters of, I mean, sure, maybe down the line it would be a good idea to discuss, but right now there's so much fatigue around everything we're doing.
He's definitely thinking outside the box, but I think Act 46 is one reason why it makes sense to broaden districts, is that there is just too much protectionism, if you will, and it becomes a very heated, sensitive issue locally, and this, we had a discussion about the amount of struggle that we're budgeting things for underutilized schools. And, I mean, really, the thing is to come up with a system where you've got a better utilization and a better quality of education.
Liz? Really quickly, I believe that consolidation isn't always an immediate plus for me in my mind, but I very rarely would get the chance to say that I think school choice and statewide school choice that's huge for me, and I am definitely in support of that. And I don't think that means we have to get rid of everybody involved in the schools in order to do that, but since it was out there and a part of that was a really, I was shocked to see that. That's not something you usually get to see, and I think would be an amazing opportunity if it did come around.
Okay, we'll keep moving along.
And one legislative piece
Sure.
that is also, I think, connected to some of the work that's forthcoming, in particular with the community engagement. There's a bill introduced to possibly reinstate capital construction aid. So if you happen to know anybody that happens to sit in the House Ed, maybe encourage support of that bill as it makes its way through the process. I feel like we might be able to utilize that.
That would be very helpful somewhere down the road. All right. Okay. The next was were the minutes from the negotiations committee, and that's included in your packet. And that's the place for people to look for a statement about how things are going. Usually included in the minutes are a statement. So that's, if you want to know what's going on, that's the place to look. Okay. Next is an action item to approve a budget in the amount of $30,950,235.31.
So moved.
All right, Allison and Andrew.
So I'm gonna complicate things a little bit during the discussion portion of this.
All right.
item.
Who's the second on that?
Andrew.
Okay, thank you.
So so that number actually needs to change slightly, because the actual budget number that the voters act on is exclusive of the state aid or state contribution on behalf of career and technical centers. So this budget needs to, the number needs to decrease down to $30,223,788.
Okay. Hold the phone before we get into any discussion. So obviously there's an error.
Right.
So rather than discuss any facts about this, let's just go to a vote. Let's move this out of the way and then get on to the correct action and discussion. All those in favor of approving a budget in the amount of $30,950,235.31, please say aye. All opposed?
Nay.
Any abstentions?
Vote that down.
We want to vote it down. So we're voting it down.
This one, right.
can hear
Okay,
that.
so you voted this one down.
Yep.
Yes, I
All
did.
right.
Yes.
This one's voted down.
We didn't like it.
Yep, nope, you did not like it. So, we might replace this with an action item to approve a budget in the amount of $30,223,788.
So moved.
Allison and Andrew again. All right. Okay, now you may discuss that amount, that budget amount.
Just for the sake of the minutes, can we just be sure to capture that it's not actually a different number, it's just a different measure of the same
It's a
number?
different calculation or.
How would you like that number?
That number reflects the amount of the paid to the tech center?
It's payment on behalf of career technical education, yes.
That's not
Which is
counted.
part of our overall budget, but is not included in what the taxpayers vote on.
Because they actually voted on
Sean
it.
is
Vote on it.
scowling, can you say it again?
You want that as part of your motion to?
No, we
approve
just
it?
want it
No.
noted, note.
Like
Please
in-
I'll
note.
just put in parentheses after.
Yes. Please note.
That's our contribution based on their budget that gets approved.
It's actually the state payment to career and technical education on our behalf. So it makes sense. Makes as much sense as everything else in the building budget.
Allison.
Thank you, Patrick, for the very in-depth, comprehensive presentation. I'm not in any further need of clarification, so I'm good. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Nope, good.
I'm seeing, I like those thumbs up. I like those thumbs up.
It's very informative.
All right, so you don't have any burning questions left, is that what I'm seeing? All right. All those in favor of approving a budget in the amount of $30,223,788, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. All right. Next. Now, does everybody have one of these updated ones to go before we make sure everybody's looking at the same paper, right?
No.
This is
I have a
draft.
couple of extras down here, if somebody didn't get one, you can send those that way.
Oh, nope, okay, never mind. We got it, we got it.
Right.
Got it. We ended up getting an extra, we're good.
Oh, okay.
Do you want everybody have one?
Jamie, do you want one?
Yeah.
So I suppose before there's a motion and discussion on the ballot and then on the warning, that same figure needs to be reflected in both the warning and the ballot. So where you see the $30,950,235 on the warning, which is the first page you're looking at, that would be a change there to $30,223,788. And then again on the ballot, you would make the same change to Article 11. Article 10 is okay as it is, but Article 11 is where the adjustment needs to be made on both the warning and the ballot.
All right, so we have to have a motion.
I don't want to make a motion.
Oh,
I
you
want to
don't?
ask a question before I make a motion.
Okay. Is it a process question? Or is it a question about the
I
ballot?
don't care. You can have someone make a motion to approve this, and then I can tell you why we have to change it, so we can vote it down again. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. It's fine. But I'm not gonna make the motion because I don't want to. Well, so it says if you're in favor of the budget, so under Article 10 on the ballot, it says if you're in favor of the budget, but it's not the budget, it's the, like, setting up the reserve fund, right? So that should say in favor of the article.
You're on
Sorry.
the ballot,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
You're on the
Here.
ballot.
Yes.
Oh,
On the check boxes, so I'm on page
Oh,
2,
right.
on the check boxes under Article 10, it says if you're in favor of the budget, mark a cross, but you're not voting on you're voting on the budget in Article 11. You're voting on, I think, just the article, right?
Establishing the capital reserve fund.
I think in favor of the article would be the adjustment to be made.
Can I copy that when you're done?
Yes. Which technically could be an adjustment to Article 11 as well. if we wanted to
Yeah,
do that
I
to be
think-
consistent.
I think it's an appropriate adjustment to both of them, actually.
So I would be happy to make a motion to approve the ballot with the change of the word article to budget in the
Oh,
four.
budget to article.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you. That one, in the 4 places that it appears.
Okay.
Do you guys still have those extra copies?
So when you make a motion, that's going to be assumed that those changes are made.
Yes, I think I just.
Oh, sorry. I could have walked over there. I was just marking up for
So for when you vote on it, we're assuming this is already changed. Okay, so I don't really need to know that.
With the corrections.
Correct the change. Otherwise, I have to note it in the motion.
Okay.
Well, the intention of my motion was that that's what, was that it,
With
I don't
the
know, if
corrections.
you don't need it to say, but I'm not gonna make a motion to say to approve it as presented, because I don't want to approve it as presented.
You want to
so-
approve it with the changes
With the
noted.
changes, noted, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
all.
So Jen's making that motion to approve the ballot with the changes as noted. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Steve? Okay. Any questions?
So just for clarification, the changes being budget becomes article, and the number changes to the $30,223,788.
I'm gonna ask a question. I'm sorry,
Yes.
you're gonna ask a question. You wanna go first?
So does that 30 million to change the spending per equal? Okay, good.
Okay. Jen?
So my question is in Article 10, at the very end of the article where it says that it gives the estimated fund balance. And is that, so, I realize for the voting on the budget, I know there's a very specific formula. For the wording of Article 10, especially that inclusion of the estimated fund balance, is that like something that our lawyers recommended phrasing that way?
Yes.
Yeah, if I had no previous knowledge of these numbers, I wouldn't know what was estimated. I would want to see like total, total capital reserve fund currently estimated, or just like to understand that that's what we're actually talking about.
That's where community engagement comes in.
Well,
So what this is intending to say here is
Informing voters.
it's intended to be sort of transparent to say, we have $1.5 million in fund balance that could be applied, or that is available. The recommendation is to use 610 of that to put in this fund. The assumption, therefore, which isn't explicit here, is that that other 900,000 is being used to offset taxes.
Jen?
Is it possible, rather than having it as a parenthetical statement, to have a question mark after the date and then have a statement that says the estimated fund balance, audited fund balance, like, could that be a second, just a sentence that says clearly what that number means?
And can we throw the fiscal year and all that too?
It is.
Yeah, I mean, really, you could just restate the district's audited fund balance existing on June 30th is estimated to be, although I'm not sure why it's estimated. I mean, it's
Right, it's
known
an
to be.
audited fund balance.
It's more words, but I think it would be more clear.
I think it's just the sort of legal flexibility that they want to try to maintain. It is true that it is audited. That number is as firm as any number we have, which we're talking about a lot of infirm numbers tonight, but that one's pretty firm.
I don't have strong feelings about whether the word estimated is or is not there. I have stronger feelings about making the rest of that statement to be more clear about what that number is. Because to me, that's the last number you look at.
Right.
So it feels like that's the number you're making a decision about, to me, anyway.
Well, and it might be helpful because a lot of people, the only time they'll ever look at any of this discussion is when they see it on the ballot.
Exactly.
Is to say what you intend to do with the remaining 900,000. In other words,
Yeah.
say with the remainder to be applied to reducing taxes for this year's budget.
Somebody have some language they'd like to offer specifically, and we can try to capture it?
You're so patient.
We'll get there.
So, like Jen said, put the question mark after June 30th, 2018.
I got that one. I made
Okay.
that note.
All right. So you can say the estimated audited fund balance
For fiscal
is
year.
1,000,005,
For fiscal year 19?
comma, 610,000 to be put into the capital reserve fund, which is what we're voting on, and the remainder 900 is returned
Used to offset.
or applied to the
Applied to
current
Used to
budget.
offset taxes.
proposed budget. This is just a starting.
Yeah. Will you have the 600 up already in the sentence? So I think saying it again.
Well, it's just clarifying exactly what you're doing with that 1,000,005 so that people don't have to do that calculation in their head.
Or, I mean, sorry.
Jen?
So an alternative way is that perhaps the 1.5 million number doesn't have to appear in it. So keeping with the question mark at the end of 2018, could we have the second sentence say something like what you were going for? The remaining 900, blah, 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 whatever, thousand will be applied, what did we say? We just said the right word.
Like to
Applied.
offset taxes.
Well, to the proposed
Proposed
budget
budget.
is to offset taxes from the proposed budget. I don't know,
Offset
I guess it sounds good
expenses.
to say.
Offset
Offset expenses in this year's budget.
Yeah. Offset expenses.
What does the 900,000 mean without knowing the total?
Well,
1.5.
because if you really wanted to, you could add up the 600 and the 900 and get the 1.5,
Right.
right? I mean,
Well-
it's just different ways to,
Shorten it.
And for me personally, when I have to explain calculations to people, I tell them what the full number is, and even if you're repeating what you're doing up there, and then what the remainder is, it's all in one statement.
Can I take a stab at what I think I heard?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I'll just start from the very beginning of the article and kind of read the whole thing. Shall the legal voters of the Mount Abraham Unified School District authorize the school board of directors to establish a capital reserve fund to be initially funded with $610,118 of the district's audited fund balance existing on June 30, 2018, question mark. The estimated audited fund balance for FY19 is $1,519,376.25. The remaining $909,258 to be applied to the proposed budget to offset taxes.
That works.
Yes.
Does that work for you?
I like everything about it except the FY19, because we haven't called it FY19, and I feel like I can never remember which fiscal year we're in at a time, so could we use the June 30th, 2018, or is there, it's longer? Or maybe before the question mark, put FY19 in parentheses, like, so after June 30th, 2018, parentheses FY19 or something, like, is that too annoying?
What if it were the audited fund balance as of June 30, 2018?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not tied to the fiscal year thing.
Is $1,519,000.
If you left it off, it probably would be.
So everything else would stay the same. So the audited fund balance as of June 30, 2018 is, and the rest of the language stays the same. That takes estimated out. Estimated audited does seem odd. And I can smooth things over with our legal counsel, let them know this is going to be okay.
You want to read the final sentence one more time?
Sure. The audited fund balance as of June 30, 2018 is $1,519,376.25. The remaining $909,258 to be applied to the proposed budget to offset taxes.
Just a point of English, it might be will be applied, would be applied instead of to be applied. Need a verb there.
Yeah. Is applied? In some ways, there's no will be, because
Would be.
the budget they're voting on
It's proposed.
applied.
has a,
Is supposed to be applied.
has that amount, yeah.
Jen?
So since the motion I made indicated that we were approving the ballot with the changes, can these changes also fall under that motion, or do we need a different motion to indicate the additional changes? Could I amend my motion?
No, but you could, somebody else could amend your motion, and if you are amicable to that, it would be a friendly amendment, and then we could vote that and then have that. We could do it, I think we
Yeah,
could
but
do
it
it.
says with
I
changes
move we
noted,
amend.
that covers all the changes. Because you haven't voted on that yet.
You're right.
So it should be
Yeah.
fine, because it says
Yeah,
with changes
with
noted.
changes.
These
Yeah,
are
you're right.
all- That'll include any
Yeah,
changes.
with changes, because we didn't define,
Right, we didn't
We didn't-
explicitly define what the changes were.
yes.
Some smart person wrote my motion that way.
But I'm gonna have to look at Patrick's notes to make sure that I reread it to you all, so we're all clear when we go and vote.
Let's do it.
Okay, is everybody good?
Can I read what I wrote one more time, because it's changed hands? All right, so I'm going to start at the beginning of the article again, so we know what it is.
Make sure.
Article 10. Shall the legal voters of the Mount Abraham Unified School District authorize the school board of directors to establish a capital reserve fund to be initially funded with $610,118 of the district's audited fund balance existing on June 30, 2018. The audited fund balance as of June 30, 2018 is $1,519,376.25. The remaining $909,258 has been applied to the proposed budget to offset taxes.
And then
Well, it would be
in
applied.
favor of the article.
If they approve this, it would be applied.
It has been applied.
right, in the budget
In the
building,
budget.
it was applied, that we
Well, but they
built,
haven't voted on that yet. That's the next article.
right, but we built the budget assuming that 600,
The 900.
the 900 was our revenue. We counted that as revenue, so we built it, so it's in there.
So now I'm wondering if we have to connect these two articles
So-
somehow.
Aha, I can explain that. From the hours I spent on the phone today with legal counsel. I'm sure we'll see the bill. So the explanation here is, because there is sort of an if-then scenario at play. If Article 10 is voted down, there's an additional $610,000 that goes into revenue in Article 11. It does not change the amount that the voters are voting on. It's still $30,223,000. What does change is the $17,928 and the 8.17%, which is why when it says it is estimated that this budget amount, if approved, will result in education spending of $17,928 and 8.17%. If there's an action that voters can take that reduces that figure, that cost per equalized pupil and that percent of increase per equalized pupil, that's okay. When they see their tax bill, it'll be lower. That's fine, and it's acceptable from a legal perspective. If they were going to take an action that actually increased that, we would have to then explain the scenario. So since the 17,928 and 8.17% is the highest they're going to see, all other scenarios are lower than that, we're okay. Legally. From transparency, ethically, all those other perspectives, it's perhaps a different conversation, but we can do that. The trick is when you start thinking about how do you put together a ballot that articulates the if-then scenarios, it makes a complete mess of things and nobody will have any idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
And in efforts to be transparent, actually confuse people and reduce clarity.
Yeah, I just would like to say, I mean, with the Act 46 ballot, which was what, a page and a half long, like, people hated that ballot. We had so much resistance just to like, it's so complicated, it's so long, no one's gonna read it, no one's gonna know what it's talking about. So I think that brevity is, I mean, they're already wordy sentences, so, statements.
And it could be if the answer to Article 10 is no, and the answer to Article 11 is no, that the board comes back, it has the option to utilize the remaining fund balance to bring those numbers down. We've talked about all the reasons why that's a bad idea, but it's an option. And that brings a different number to the voters.
Does anybody need it read again? They're all on? So I'm gonna go with changes as.
So we spoke almost exclusively about Article 10, but we're about to take action on the ballot. Were there any other changes to Article 11 before we?
We have the number change.
And the rest of the language is
It's pretty firm, but.
Any other questions on the other article? All right. All those in favor of approving the ballots, articles, and as, with the changes noted, as we have discussed, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Okay.
I'm not looking at my agenda. We're doing the warning next, right?
Yes, we are.
So I'd like to make a motion to approve the warning with the same changes noted for the ballot for Articles 10 and 11.
Second.
And Steve seconds.
Did you get that?
Yep.
And it made sense, right?
Any other questions? Everybody's clear? We're going to make the same changes on the warning that we just made on the ballot. Okay. All those in favor of approving the warning with the same changes noted on the that we noted on the ballot for Articles 10 and 11, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Next item is to set tuition rates for FY20. That was included. Is there a motion to approve the tuition rates for FY20?
So moved.
Andrew? All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
Aaron? All right, any questions, discussions?
How often does this happen?
Set tuition rates every year.
How often are they used?
Oh, we have a handful of kids every year.
Really? So without school choice? It's
Mhm.
different? Is it like typically a K through 6 kind of thing, or?
Some K through 6, so we have some, so I'm thinking about Buell's Gore as a place where some students may come, that tuition follows. We do have had in the past, I'm not sure if we have any currently, parents who pay the tuition for their students to attend our schools, even if they live out of district.
Any other questions? Okay. All those in favor of setting tuition rates for FY20, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. An action item to set the number of school choice seats for FY20 at 10 new seats in and 10 new seats out. Is there a motion?
Make motion.
Amy?
Second.
Allison? Any questions, discussions?
I can just offer that is, given the size of our school, that's the minimum number allowed. So, whatever value that is.
The minimum or the maximum?
It's the minimum that we have to allow to choice out. Historically, we generally have a wait list for students choicing out, and we typically do not fill available seats for students choicing in. So the control here, the greater concern is more on those that choice out than choice in. And 10 is the minimum we have to allow each year, which was some new understanding after this time last year that we received. So that means a total of 40. So 10 per year with 4 high school years means we could theoretically have 40 students from 9 through 12 that choice out.
And so the calculation in that is pupil.
We still get to count them as equalized people. So they're still ours even though they're choicing out. And no money follows them to their choice out school. It's very interesting.
Liz?
But that also, it does have an impact on like the class sizes, et cetera. So it does have an impact, but generally not a financial impact necessarily, or programmatic.
So thanks for explaining that. That was good overall. I mean, so what does the waiting list look like? How many people? What?
Well, so it'll be interesting as time goes on. The wait list will grow smaller because our practice has changed based on our new learning. Our previous understanding was that 10 total slots for the school was what we had was the minimum requirement. So we've had a wait list for a while. But this new understanding, being that it's 10 per year, a total of 40 for the school, that wait list will probably grow smaller as time goes on, because we don't have to jump from 10 to 40 next year. we'd have to jump from 10 to 20 because we have to offer 10 new slots on top of the 10 already filled and eventually grow to 40, which means our wait list will probably get smaller and smaller. But currently, even with these additional 10, there's probably a wait list of another 10.
And that is it's a lottery selection criteria?
It is.
So if there's no financial disadvantage to offering more slots, then why not offer more slots?
Because again, the impact on, so if you have lots of students leaving, that has an impact on ability to have sufficient numbers of students for certain courses and sort of making it seem feasible to offer the breadth of programs that we want to be able to offer. So if we think about those AEP classes of 7, and if we took 5 kids out of it, now you have an AP class of 2, and that has an impact on programming and sustainability.
Yeah. So I mean, I appreciate that because obviously everyone can't school choice out, but those 5 kids might actually be better served by an AP program in a different school, right? If they had that opportunity.
It's true.
Kevin?
So what would be do you have any sense of the demographics, or you're talking about AP programs, so is it the students that we more have to take care of, advantage of those as opposed to
transportation issues or something?
I guess I would say there's a whole host of reasons why students choice out. Some of them may be to take advantage of athletic programming. Some may be for academic programming. Some may be relationship challenges they're having in our school system that they may find better elsewhere. Proximity to parents' work. Parents may work in a different school system. There's a whole host of reasons why students choice in and choice out. Like those are some reasons why students choice in as well.
Krista?
Well, I guess I was just thinking that if we were going to consider offering more than the minimum, might be interesting to know some of those reasons a little more, just because I do have a little bit of a concern about those that are able, and then a certain demographic leaving changes the remaining population of students. So if you've got super high flying athletes and our academic students who see better opportunities somewhere else, that really changes the diversity of our student population, and I think that's a real negative of school choice, in my opinion, in general. So anyway, I would just be interested to know what those demographics are if we chose to increase that minimum.
I'd much rather spend our time figuring out how to make our school a place they don't want to leave.
Exactly.
Yeah. Allison?
So this is for high school choice, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it doesn't impact the 7th and 8th grade number.
Okay. Any more question about the number of school choice seats? Liz?
As we make this decision, I think we should also consider that some people may also up and move to somewhere else, thus taking away the financial support for our community. So I would think that a demographic that you might be concerned about in that way, their whole family might just go rather than having that as our tax base here. So that's something as well that supports our schools and their ability to do what we want them to do.
Okay. No more questions? All those in favor of setting the number of school choice seats for FY20 at 10 seats in and 10 seats out, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Do you want it noted, Liz? Do you want it noted in the minutes?
Yeah, that'd be good. Thank you.
So that she voted, Liz voted, she was opposed to that one.
Okay.
All right. Next is an action item to approve the financial management questionnaire and authorize the chair to sign.
So moved.
Jen? Is there a second?
Second.
Andrew? Okay, any discussion? No? All right.
Who fills this out?
What's that? Who fills it out? Howard.
Well, no, because you're the one signing at the end, I see.
All right. All those in favor of approving the financial management questionnaire and authorizing the chair to sign, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Okay. Next is an action item to authorize board members to speak on behalf of the school district at their local town meetings.
So moved.
Allison, is there a second? Andrew? Okay, discussion? Jen?
Why do we need an action about this?
Because it's essentially two members, well, with the exception of Bristol. Bristol has a higher to go, but we're giving them a task to do that is in turn representing the board. So right now, as our policy is written, all communication comes typically to me and through me kind of thing. So this authorizes the board, the individuals in each town to go out and speak on behalf of the board in front of their town.
Okay.
Were we going to,
Discussion looks like it's next.
yeah,
No, do you have any questions about that?
yeah, were we going to concoct a
Canned response, if you will.
canned response?
Right, yeah, I believe that. Sarah was right. Discussion about our prep for the annual meeting. Kevin?
So that comes after this?
Yeah, once we authorize them, we're gonna
Okay,
figure out
all
what
right.
they're gonna say.
Okay.
So has there been a discussion with the respective towns to have a slot, or is it just?
It would look similar to what legislators have. You know, a few minutes just to kind of give an update, here's what's going on at the State House.
Okay.
Same idea. The idea being that, you know, I certainly heard from a number of community members, the absence of any school board representation at town meetings would really feel like a loss and a missed opportunity. And in particular, as we're thinking about, you know, the conversation we had about tonight's budget, that would be a very timely conversation at town meetings to talk about, and it's an opportunity to help explain and articulate the impact of the budget and how it all came to be. In addition to, yeah, that's the elevator speech.
Yeah. And it may be something as, I mean, we'll get to this, but it, you know, last year we mailed out a flyer and it had just those kind of things, talking points on that flyer, so. In the next couple of minutes, we may be discussing that particular piece. But there may be a time limit on that discussion. Just warning you.
45 seconds.
All right. Any other question about authorizing the board members to speak? All right. All those in favor of authorizing board members to speak on behalf of the school district at their local town meetings, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Okay. Next is a discussion to prepare for the annual meeting, which is on February 26th. Allison.
So, since we've already prepared a note card or whatever it is we mailed out last year that had the talking points, what is your idea about what you think would be a good thing to do this year? Should we do a similar card and then also put in the extra complicatedness that we've discussed tonight? Do you want board members to help you put together something? I mean, you already have the PowerPoint, so I don't want to get into the wordsmithing because that's just not a good use of our time.
I guess I have a few thoughts on that. I think the postcard sort of flyer thing is a great way to get information out there to everyone. There's probably no better way because you can hold as many community forums as you want. people aren't going to attend them. Like, most people will not attend those and then therefore go to the polls uninformed. I think the postcards are a concise way, it's an inexpensive way to send something out to everyone in the community. It's also something that could help to inform some talking points for the few minutes that you get at your respective town meetings. I think there's probably some additional points that you may want to make in that elevator speech at your town meetings, but certainly some connected to the budget. And then I think the more in-depth presentation like we had tonight, I would maybe say the exact same presentation you had tonight is what I could share at the annual meeting, and then we can field questions and engage in whatever dialogue may come around that.
Sarah?
What about using Front Porch Forum as another tool?
Front Porch Forum,
Same
Facebook,
information.
we can sort of, a website, we can put that out there as well.
Krista?
I don't know if it would be too dense, but if there is a way to include the weaving in of the community priorities into what is shared on a postcard or Front Porch Forum, I thought the Community Engagement Committee should do some looping back to folks, since we did that survey and there was such a good response, and showing the connection in the budget building to those priorities. And I originally was thinking we could put a link to the full presentation, which we could do, but I don't know if there is a way to include, I
think it'd be hard to put that in onto a postcard in addition to the rest of the budget information, but I don't think there'd be any problem putting it in Front Porch Forum or on Facebook. Like, we can include a lot more information there efficiently.
Well, the postcard could also include the, a text link that you have to retype and
go here to find the presentation and for more information. Yeah.
I have no idea if this is possible, but are you allowed to do on Front Porch Forum, do a link to potentially an ad put on by the school board about why this budget came to be, and explaining the two articles, or is there a link to, like, the video 2-minute talking speech? Are you allowed to do that?
I think a video link on Front Porch Forum to Sarah talking about the budget and
like, we could be it's our budget, we can sell the budget, right?
We can explain it.
We can explain it. We
So,
just can't say so.
I think we need to do it in a talking way, that is a short clip, and I also really, I don't mean to say this, but I think when on the poll days, we have to make ourselves visible and just ask, do you have any questions about the two articles about the school budget, to almost everybody that walks in. Is that something you can do?
there are pretty clear rules and regulations around what you can do and can't do and where you can do them and where you can't do them. So we just have to make sure that we are adhering.
If we say it at town meeting, and we say, we're school board members, whatever, feel free to ask us any questions that, I don't know when or where.
After the meeting, I guess.
Yeah, you might have to do like the representatives do. We'll be out in the hall if you have any additional questions. We'll let the meeting move on.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think you can do it at a polling place.
Okay.
But I do think it's fair at town meeting to sort of give the elevator speech and say, I'd be happy to answer any further questions you have or talk with you further about this. I'll be in the back of the room at the end of the meeting, or here's my phone number, give me a call, whatever mechanism works.
And the other thing is, my chair letter is already in process, and I have pointed out that the community and staff priorities were used in building this budget. So, and yes, an independent contacted me. I said I talked about the no staff reductions, and that we were going on the community surveys we got and people's priorities. So, Allison.
Is there some way that we could do a news spot for the local news channels? They come in and talk to Patrick, and he does a little elevator speech kind of thing. I mean, just explaining, just the facts the way they are. It's not a public service announcement, but how they came and talked to Jess about the high school during the renovation. I think they talked to you too, possibly.
It's a little trickier with news, like so thinking WCX or whatever, easier with the newspaper, like they're more receptive to like it.
And you
the
can also
MAUSD
tailor.
budget is much more newsworthy to Addison Independent than it is to WCAX.
You're more likely to be quoted directly in the newspaper. In the TV, they'll cut it up and parse it out. God knows what you'll end up with.
And the TV adds 10 pounds. So.
So, in terms of responding to questions on Front Porch Forum and vocal comments, do you want to have that come through you instead of each one of us going on to Front Porch Forum and responding to a community member's comment? Because we might end up with a lot of different stories and answers, all trying to say the same thing, but then the interpretation and yada yada.
Well, if there's a link to something that's explanatory, you can basically push them in that direction again. But if it's a comment that isn't covered under that presentation, then I'm not sure what.
Jen?
So I feel like dialogue via Front Porch Forum is really not a constructive way to address questions about the budget.
I'm not sure that I would have enough time to do it.
Well, I mean,
No.
I can't imagine you doing it, and I think sometimes those things, I think there's a lot of benefits to Front Porch Forum and to Facebook and ways of getting that information out, and sometimes those discussions can really take a really unproductive turn and with a large audience. So I guess my inclination would be if we felt like we wanted to respond, that we could perhaps have something, I hate to call it a canned response, but basically something that says, so excited you're interested in the MAUSD budget. Check out, this assumes that we have a document or a link or something that you can point people to. And I'm happy to answer questions if you contact me individually or, something that takes it out of, that kind of public
Right.
And come to
forum.
the
I don't know.
Right.
It's obviously up for discussion if people feel like that's the right, even the contact me individually. If people are asking specific questions, I don't want to ignore the questions and not answer them. Often I don't think that it's productive to do it in that way.
I was just going to say that I agree with her. I mean, you don't want to prompt this huge discussion that's going to potentially put bad information out there, because that's what happens sometimes. To her point is, we put this out there and then people start putting in their 2 cents that don't have anything to do with this process. They could spread misinformation and make it a little bit harder to control.
Well, I'm wondering, I know Karen can see all of them, and I know in the past she has compiled a list of what they all say. And I'm wondering if she has in the past, sent me a list of here's what it's saying on Front Porch Forum, and so if there's a common theme of questions, maybe then one answer to that question could be out without a lot of back and forth,
Or a broadcast of here's an FAQ from all the comments that we've received or something.
Right. Maybe that would, if she could send out because I see some, but I don't see them all kind of thing.
And another thought would be to maybe, if there is going to be somebody who's going to respond on a town forum from the board, it would be one person for each town. So that for the other 4 towns, it isn't both people responding, and for Bristol, it isn't all 5 of us, it's just one person. And so then you could have that quote-unquote canned response of, thank you for your interest, here's a link, and then please come to our informational meeting, and then leave it at that.
So we are limited on how many posts we can make in a month from
For the district.
From the district.
Right, whereas an individual person from each town has unlimited. And, see a question one day and you just say, thank you for your interest, and just leave it.
Right, it may be more effective and help reduce the dialogue and the chatter and the response if the original post were to come from the main office. Because if it comes from individuals, then it all of a sudden just opens up individual conversations.
And it gives each of you something to point to, like, as referenced in this post.
Exactly.
Come back to this link, come back to that information.
But I do think in the effort to get as much information to as many people as possible, that I think it's a useful tool. You know, it has some necessary evils as part of it, but it's effective.
Don't be last.
Don't be last in the schedule of meetings.
Well, I mean, like, of comments, unless they've already started. I don't know. But we should be proactive.
So I'm imagining a Front Porch Forum post that has a link to whatever postcard it is we're going to send out, has a link to this presentation that we're going to use, and the body of the post is the elevator speech. Right? And we can point to any one of those three things, and that becomes the narrative that stays consistent.
And please come to the informational meeting.
Yeah.
There you go. Just jumped out of my chair for that.
What did you say?
I can't hear down here.
Oh, sorry, and come to the informational meeting.
Oh, right.
The district-wide informational meeting.
The informational meeting is a board meeting, and so is there opportunity for, there's public comment?
It's an annual meeting run
Right.
by a moderator.
Right.
So we sit and she runs the meeting.
Right,
And then there's a board meeting.
right,
After.
but there's no community engagement.
The moderator.
Oh, the moderator, yes,
handles
okay,
that
I went to
piece.
the meeting last year, okay,
Yep.
I remember, yeah,
So,
all right.
Jen?
So it sounds to me like we have a plan related to the Front Porch Forum post, the initial one, more or less, except for the content of the elevator speech part of it, right? But I think that we're also talking about, so there's this initial post kind of that we just outlined. We have potential postcard, we have content of the annual meeting, are those kind of, and then there's what we're gonna say at the town meetings. So
The
those
talking
like the
points.
4 kind of things that we need to cover during this time that we have for preparation for the annual meeting?
I think so.
Is there anything we're missing? Because I know how, for me, like, it gets after 9 o'clock, and I'm gonna miss 1 or 2 of those things, and we're gonna realize next week we forgot to. You know, so I was just making a list, okay.
So I can offer some thoughts around that. I'm happy to take a stab at the postcard, building off of the postcard we sent out last year and updating the information, kind of tweaking it with our current context. That seems feasible to do. And I'm happy in terms of the annual meeting to deliver the presentation as I did tonight and sort of answer questions and sort of respond to the community in that format under the direction of the moderator who will kind of be overseeing things. For me, I think what is important is to be sure that the board presents as though this is the board's budget and that it's not my budget, because that is the reality. So I'm just sensitive to that, which is where I think the elevator speech is important. So the elevator speech could be something we incorporate into the annual meeting when we talk about the budget, in addition to the town meetings, in addition to the Front Porch Forum posts and Facebook posts and things like that. So if there were a small group of folks that would be interested in either crafting that elevator speech, I'm happy to be part of that work, crafting it, and support that group in any way. But I think for that to be the board's voice and not my voice is important.
I'll work on that.
Okay.
Yep.
I can help.
Okay. All right.
I'll just wait for any request for support that might come from any
I'm
of you.
going to finish my board chair letter now that I have some definitive information to put in. Some numbers not, I'm not going to get real specific, percentages, but I'll finish that, and there may be parts of that can be pulled into the elevator speech. Okay.
Is that something you're allowed to pass around, Don, if we just reply to you?
The,
If you're gonna try to
which
take
thing?
your chairman
The elevator speech.
letter-
The elevator speech or my chair letter?
Well, your chair letter, you said you're gonna morph that into the elevator speech?
Well, I think we can take parts of it. There's some parts of it that are, you know, just explanations so that people understand things and process, because even though we've already done this once, there are people out there that didn't quite grasp that, wait a minute, there's no little budgets anymore, there's just this one big one. And so there's some of those points like, hey, let's remember, you know, it's one big budget kind of thing, and this is where you go to get information.
Just
right?
maybe not the word big.
Yeah, well, six
Consolidated.
schools, one budget.
There we go.
One budget, 6 schools, one budget, kind of thing. So, I think we have to be careful about passing it around. Then we're doing work outside of a meeting when it's something kind of that way.
Like the rest of the world does?
So are you talking specifically about your chair letter or about the kind of elevator summary of the budget? Or both?
I think he was talking about both.
I was just thinking if you were crafting a chair letter and you thought some of that could morph into an elevator speech, that you could broadcast it to the group and we could send replies back to you, not to everybody, but just back to you.
So I think like three or four
Right, we
people
definitely
kind
don't
of
wanna have
offered to
7.
work on that, so
Okay.
is that?
No, that's fine too.
So I think, right. So as long as you trust us, we'll try really hard to do
What
our
I can
job.
do is once.
I don't trust myself right now at 9 o'clock.
Yeah, that would be painful.
I can send the letter out so you see it before it's published. When I finish it and I send it, then I'll send it to everybody so you'll know what's in it before it gets there, kind of thing. I can do that.
I just was gonna say, like, for those of us like in the same town, so Allison, Krista, and you know,
Yeah.
we'll be at the meeting together so that if we need support from whoever helped draft it.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Jen?
So I think I signed up to help with the elevator summary. Is that also going to address the talking points? Or the talking points are going to be kind of that
Yes.
plus the postcard? So that's not really a separate item that has to get addressed?
I think the elevator speech, the talking points turned into the elevator speech.
Okay. Okay. Are you going to kill me if I make one more comment?
Nope. I might fall asleep, but.
So for the annual meeting, I think the presentation you did tonight was really great and was really informative. I think we spent like maybe an hour and a half on it tonight, and I think our whole annual meeting is scheduled for an hour.
Yep.
So, and I think people are gonna wanna ask questions. So, I mean, I don't know, it's not like, it's easy to take that. My gut feeling is that it probably is like 15 to 20 minutes of presentation that we can fit, unless we make the annual meeting a lot longer. Like, that's kind of my sense. I don't know if it's possible to hit all the points that you want to hit in that time. But as a person sitting on this board, that is my perspective on what we might want to present for the annual meeting.
You should pick your favorite pieces.
Well, the trick is, I have to figure out what everyone else's favorite pieces would be, and those are the ones that stay.
Yeah.
Liz?
And then in the morning for the annual meeting, if we get to see the presentation again, some people were anxious to see it and didn't realize, which in one-on-one conversation, it wasn't on the agenda that there would be an opportunity for discussion or questions for tonight. You would have, like, we had a note. So if maybe that people really knew that it wasn't just going to be, that they would have an opportunity to ask questions, and that if that was in the morning of the meeting.
That's pretty set. The articles are pretty set in
Or
how
in
that.
when we posted on the Front Porch Forum to say that this meeting is going to happen, if it could go with that somehow.
Right. I think that goes with the informational piece of the when we say it's an informational piece, informational meeting, your chance to ask questions. That's
just making sure, yeah.
And honestly, the amount of back and forth will be controlled by the moderator.
Right.
Yep.
All right, you good?
Yes.
All right.
One more piece related to, but just a very quick thing, more related to town meeting than the annual meeting. We do have 2 seats that will be vacant, Aaron and Amy, and there's currently no one running for those seats in those towns. So write-in candidates are encouraged if you can have conversations with folks in Lincoln or Bristol that might be interested. A write-in is preferable over not having anyone run, and then the town select board advertises for people who might be interested to run, and the town select board then appoints. So we'd be talking about months after before anyone is sitting in those seats if it goes the route of being appointed by the town select board. If we have write-in candidates, they start in March.
Do you know how many names you have to get, or how many write-in ballots you
It's a
have to get in
percentage of
order
the
to be?
electorate, I think, right? Or
And Lincoln,
something
you're
else
supposed to
that
get
says-
11 signatures, you mean?
Oh,
two?
no,
No, not for the
write in
ballot,
on the
but to be
ballot.
written in. How many
Oh, right.
write-in
Yeah.
tallies do you,
Majority.
total?
I just, yeah, more, the majority.
Majority of the
No, but
write-ins.
there is some, because I am not an expert on it, but I could ask John McNerney, because I know he had posted at one point, like there were some, because it's really labor intensive for the people counting the ballots to deal with write-ins, so there was some discussion within certain public forums in Moncton about how unproductive it was to write in Mickey Mouse or other, humorous, which I never had considered that people did that. Apparently people do that, and then they have to tally all of those, and there is some like threshold so that, if 3 people vote for Mickey Mouse, you don't actually elect Mickey Mouse, but I don't know what that is. I feel like it was like 5% or something of the electorate, or I don't know, 5% of the votes.
Yeah, I don't
or-
remember exactly what it was
Yeah.
either, but it's connected to the electorate or something like that.
Because I know last year I wrote in somebody's name, but they didn't win the election, so there's got to be, some threshold.
A write-in candidate shall not qualify as a primary winner unless he or she receives at least 1/2 the number of votes as the number of signatures required in his or her office on the primary petition.
Okay,
So-
so you would need 5 votes for Lincoln.
Right.
Bristol's like 28 or something. And get 14 people to write in it, or for,
You just get your family.
Exactly. You're like, guess what, Mom, you're doing it.
But really, the difference is simply a matter of representation on this board. It's
Right.
one gets representation with no gap, the other has perhaps a couple of
Right.
months gap. And when we're talking about Lincoln in particular, that's half of your representation isn't here
Right,
versus 20% of Bristol.
Right.
right.
Well, and I feel like Lincoln has had some, inconsistent representations, and it's really important that Lincoln be represented.
Yeah, agreed.
I don't know if I'm moving from Lincoln, so I won't qualify. So that's why I couldn't run again.
I
'Cause
was
if
not- I
leave
wasn't-
Lincoln, no, I
wasn't trying to
know.
pressure you,
But
I'm
if I
just saying.
leave Lincoln, because I talked to her about this, I said, if I leave Lincoln, I no longer qualify.
Mm.
So I can't be appointed to a board that I know that I can only be for 3 more months.
All right. Okay. The next is a discussion item. I'm hoping it's like 3 minutes of discussion, but I don't know. Vermont Career and Technical Education Report.
My recollection is that was something that Caleb was interested in having as an agenda item for discussion.
Well,
For whatever that's worth.
Well,
it was, yeah, we can table
we
it.
table. Yes, please.
Jen,
Could we request that if we table it, that next time there's some context, because I couldn't figure out why I was reading it.
Right.
What it had, what we were doing with it, so it would be super helpful to have just like a paragraph of the purpose of its inclusion or something.
Okay.
We
So
can
we'll
assume
give
that
that to
Caleb
Caleb
was
as an
gonna
action
tell us.
item
I
too.
thought it was
All
very
right, so
informative, but
are
I
you-
didn't think we needed to do anything with it.
I remember it coming, now it's suddenly coming back to me, but he sent it way early on in the month before it was one of those, yep, we're gonna get that on, and then we started adding things onto the budget.
And I may want to provide an update for the Hannaford Center.
Well, I was waiting for like, so we should be doing this with the funding, we should be, like, I just.
All right, so Jen, did you make a motion to table that item?
She did, and I seconded it.
And Krista seconded it.
And for what it's worth, during discussion, at our annual meeting, or the meeting that will follow the annual meeting, the tech center director is interested in coming and sort of doing his budget presentation, talking about the career center. So if you
That'd
gave
be
an
great.
update at the same time and it tied into the conversation about career and technical, it might kind of
would be
all make
great.
sense together.
Because
Was
it's
he
one
the- Was
information.
he the poor
meeting,
soul
which is
that tried to
awesome.
tack on to the end of the annual meeting last year?
Yes.
Yes, that would be him. And I have given him fair warning that it could very well be the same thing this year, and he's totally okay with it.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a ton of ink in my printer, so I just made.
All right.
But all those in favor of tabling that item until next meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. All right. What I gave you is, at the last meeting, we talked about maybe having something that we could send out to people to let them know, hey, like, when there's a public comment, this is kind of what happens. If you see something that's missing, if you see something that you have a strong belief to take it out, let me know. But I don't want to sit there and go through every sentence, so. Sorry, I don't have a copy for it. I gave them all away. Do you want an executive session?
Sounds good to me.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I mean, I should get it out soon, but if. So I was thinking that could be perhaps on the district website, just a hey out there, and maybe a front porch forum, put just out to let people know, hey, we've noticed that you've been coming and had some comments, and you might be wondering, and so.
The only other thing you might mention, although there's a lot mentioned here, is that we're developing other ways
Right.
to have a more informal conversation back and forth.
So are you done on this? Do you want this one back? Do you have one?
I don't have one, but I'm writing notes here, so. But, if you want to scribbles a note on there, and if you see something, then I'll just take it and work a little more on it. Maybe I can do two things at once.
There's a lot of them signed.
Is there? Yeah, I'll be here a while.
So do you need an action?
Nope, if you got comments, give them to me now. If not, I'll just.
Do you want this back, John?
What's that?
Would you like this back?
If you have any corrections or anything you want me to see, just pop them in and give them back. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what you do with
I
it.
suggested 2 additional
Okay.
paragraph splits.
Okay.
The editor and me couldn't stop.
That's all right. When you're writing it, you're so in it that you can't think of anything but it. And then, I leave it alone and I come back, and I leave it alone and come back. All right.
Husband asked me if I had something of his.
Thank you. Okay, we do not need an executive session. Is there any other public comment at this time?
Thanks for all the hard work.
Thanks for staying. Yeah.